Hello, everybody, and apologies in advance for the late starting, my tardiness. I hope you can forgive me for. I was intending on starting on time, and then at literally last minute, a couple of things just came up. So I did leave a note saying I was going to be starting slightly late. I said 5 minutes, it ended up being 10 minutes. But thank you for joining me on this rather impromptu. I only scheduled this, I think, about a couple of hours ago, so it hasn't been scheduled for a long time. And it was just based on the video that I saw this morning. And I thought, oh, what a vile. You could tell when I made the thumbnail what I thought. Yeah, I was like, what a vile, horrendous human being. But here we are in 2026, and seeing this video, which is quite an old one, which I'm going to be sharing with you, is an interview with one Nigel Biggar, who's a member of the House of Lords. He was promoted to that position by the leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch. So he was placed in that position by a black woman, but she's, by the way, she's black only, only in phenotype, nothing else. For all intents and purposes, Kemi Badenoch has no connection to her African heritage and no connection to black people on the whole. But it was interesting because he's been given this position in the House of Lords, so he is now a member of parliament and rulership and leadership in this nation. And for all intents and purposes, the guy is just a racist, you know. And I know people have issues with me saying this, but the viewpoints and the perspectives that he shares are hyper nationalistic, and they're hyper nationalistic to the point where I know that this crosses over into racism. So he's very similar to like a Simon Webb, who puts out their revisionist versions of history, which completely abdicate any wrongdoing from the British. And he's very scolding of anyone who even hints at the idea that the British have been anything less than perfect in their pursuits of empire, colonialism, and imperialism. He has zero problem. He won't call it Geno, you know what, when it was that. He won't call it, you know, a terror, you know what, when it is that. As long as the person or the perpetrators conducting the act are white and British, he will see nothing wrong with anything they've done historically. And Mehdi did do a good job. I think someone mentioned in the, yeah, Fabrice mentioned in the comments, Mehdi masterpiece. I think Mehdi actually did an outstanding job in terms of his, not only his level of journalism, but the fact that he was incredibly well read, and really read his rights. He was well read in his book. He was able, so his, in terms of his job as a investigative journalist, he done an outstanding job. In terms of his job as a historian, well, that's not his job, but I think he still did a really good job there. And he showed himself to be historically literate enough to be able to refute our Mr. Nigel Biggar here. So let's become a little bit more acquainted with who this character is, this Nigel Biggar. So we can get some context as to why I'd be covering this and where this conversation came from. So I'm not going to do any more research other than just read a few lines from his Wikipedia so we can get an idea of who this person is. And one of the reasons I'm doing this is so those of you who aren't from the UK, who aren't from this landmass, I do talk quite a lot about the UK's version of racism and how it differs from the kind of more uncouth, wear it on your sleeve, unrefined version of racism that you have in the States and in other parts of the world. The UK have really gotten racism down to this very, very fine, almost exquisitely delivered this, you know, this masterfully crafted form of oppression, persecution, and exploitation. They really have it down to a T. And this, you know, Lord Biggar, the fact that he, you know, has a peerage, you know, and he's so honored in British society in spite of his views, which are Tommy Robinson-esque, I would say probably worse than Tommy Robinson's, should be a good indicator as to how the UK conducts itself in terms of race relations. He is a perfect a perfect microcosm of exactly how the British execute racism. He is very similar to Richard Lynn, who I covered on during the whole IQ discussion, and I talked about this doctor Richard Lynn. So these people will always be educated. This guy is a former lecturer, and they're not idiots, but it doesn't stop them from being the most heinous racist and the most apologist, genocidally apologist people that you could come across. They are their outlooks are very adjacent. You could call them Hitler-esque outlooks. That's what they believe in. They laud and they esteem and they venerate characters like Cecil Rhodes openly. In the modern era, even though anyone with any iota of a conscience would look back at characters like Cecil Rhodes and outright condemn them, he will defend characters like that because he doesn't view Black life, he doesn't view African life, he doesn't view anything. He doesn't review anything that's melanated as an equal, as someone who's worth approaching. We are just disposable elements of history to someone with his outlook. And he really is a vile human being. So let's just quickly have a quick read so you can kind of understand who he is. So Nigel John Biggar, Baron Biggar. This is someone who's, Baron. That's not a term you throw around. You'd be lucky to meet a baron in the UK. So this is someone of incredibly high social standing, effectively someone of the nobility. Anyone who's in the House of Lords, for instance, is someone who's effectively operating at the House of Lords. In the House of Parliament effectively operates like the oligarchic arm of British Parliament. So you have the kind of democratic arm of British Parliament, but then you have the oligarchic arm, which is the House of Lords. Those are the people that aren't elected. They're there because they're rich and powerful. That's how British Parliament works. And he is a part of the House of Lords. The House of Lords. It's self-explanatory, isn't it? Baron Biggar is a British Anglican priest, theologian, ethicist. I find it hilarious that he calls himself an ethicist because there's nothing ethical about his perspectives. He's demonic in my opinion, but anyway, let's carry on. Ethicist and life peer. From 2007 to 2022 he was Regius Professor of moral and pastoral theology. And this is the scary thing, it's this overlap with fascist, racist, unapologetically barbaric perspectives like this man's, Lord Biggar's, and Christianity. Those of you who are of the religious ilk, you have to deal with this. You have to now, in 2026, deal with the fact that Christianity is the Western arm of extremism. That this coupling between, there's a clear and overt coupling between Christian perspectives, Christian outlooks, and the violence and aggression of the West against other races, against non-white races. It's always wrapped up in theology, pastoral theology, and or Christian nationalism. They always go in hand, and you have to deal with that. Like this whole demonization of Islam. Now, I'm not some advocate of Islam, but let's be honest about which religion has shed more blood historically. Christianity wins hands down. Let's talk about which one has shed more blood in the modern era. You can add up all of those, suicide bombers and X, Y, and Z. You can add those all up back to back and multiply it by 20, and it wouldn't even be a fraction of what the Christians have done in the last couple of 100 years. okay, or at least the people exercising themselves or presenting themselves as Christian nations. So you really do have to deal with this quite clear, I want to say, overlap between church and state, and it seems to be, yeah, it seems to be cyclical. It seems to be coming back around again, because there was a period of separation, but now we seem to be coming back into this really strong Christian outlooks. It's quite bizarre to me, because growing up, you know, when I was a teenager, it just felt like religion as a whole was just on its way out. It felt like we were heading towards an atheistic world, and the only people who were actually Christian were people who were actually interested in spirituality. But we're now seeing Christianity being used as a prop once again, and as a standard, as a flag standard for imperialism. It's being used as the front runner to, you know, we want to bring back Christian values, and we have it in Britain, and you have it in America, and the forefront of Western hegemony seems to be under the banner of a Christian military. Yeah, a Christian military. I mean, that's just in itself, really. Let's read education, early life, and well, actually, University of Oxford as well. You know, this isn't some small universities. This guy, when you hear his perspectives and the fact that he's one of the lead lecturers of morality, you know, professor of moral and pastoral theology. So he's essentially the professor of Christianity and morality. Yeah, let's just let's shift that semantically and just say he's the professor of Christianity and morality at the University of Oxford. So at one of the number one or two university in the UK, he is the leading professor of morality and Christianity, and he possesses none of these traits. He's an absolute demon when you hear him speak. That's crazy. Anyway, let's carry on. Early life and education. Nigel John Biggar was born on the 14th of March, 1955, Castle Douglas. Okay. Now, I don't know if that's an area of, that's actually the name of the Castle Douglas. It's a town. It's a town. Okay. So let me not say too much. It's a town in Scotland. I was going to say, imagine man was born in a castle. Anyway, let's carry on. He was educated at Monkton Combe School, a private school. So like he's of the upper crust, okay? And obviously you know that because you know get titles like Lord Biggar if you come from. I know people have got this romantic idea that people could kind of like started from the bottom, now we're here, but that's really like that's the have-nots. That's the story of successful black people. The story of most, you know, exuberantly rich white people is that they were born into the, you know, into the upper crust. Okay. Let's read from here. So in 2007, he became the Regius Professor of Moral and Pastoral Theology at the University of Oxford. He also became a canon of Christ Church Cathedral, Oxford. He retired in September 2022. Ethics and Empire project. So this is where it gets interesting. In 2017, Biggar initiated a 5-year project at Oxford University entitled Ethics and Empire. Its stated aim was to scrutinize critiques against the historical facts of empire. They should really have put facts in inverted commas there. Carry on. Historians and academics widely criticized the project, claiming it was attempting to balance out the violence committed in the name of empire with its supposed benefits. The project also received criticism for failing to engage with the wider scholarship on empire and not submitting itself to peer scrutiny and rigorous academic debate. So this is a very similar approach to what Simon Webb put out. This is a guy who, for all intents and purposes, is not really a trained historian. He's got as much right. I wouldn't say right. He's got as much, He's got as much right to really discuss matters of history like this as I do. You know, I did a documentary on slavery, which I think was far more scholastic than the book that he created. But really, you know, Mine didn't go up for, you know, academic peer review. His didn't go up for academic peer review. There's a bunch of his opinions. And actually, when I heard him speak, the best analogy that I could think of is I was instantly reminded, or at least my mind was drawn to Matt Walsh's documentary on slavery. I think Matt Walsh has got a documentary on slavery. Correct me if I'm wrong, on the Daily Wire. And Matt Walsh is just an idiot. He's just an idiot journalist, and it's like the worst, most unacademic pile of shite I've ever heard. But he's got a viewpoint, he's got a perspective, he wants to put it out, and he wants people to agree with it. And that's kind of the same level of authority that he brings. Now, bear in mind, a lot of the provenance for anyone even given this guy any level of audience is his position in Oxford University, his very senior position in Oxford University. So let's carry on. Biggar addressed the ethics of colonialism in an op-ed for the Times, arguing that the history of the British Empire was morally mixed. Yeah, and it's interesting, he'll say morally mixed, but then the only positive thing that he'll have to say is the abolition of slavery. And I'm able to refute that quite convincingly with the historical evidence, but we'll get to that anyway. And that guilt around Britain's colonial legacy may have gone too far. What guilt? What guilt or repentance have the British shown around their colonial legacy? Absolutely ludicrous, but this is what they do. He also defended an article by Bruce Gilley titled "The Case for Colonialism," asserting that Gilley's appeal for a balanced reappraisal of the colonial past was both courageous and a call for Britain to moderate its post-imperial guilt. Britain has had no post-imperial guilt. In fact, you could even argue that Britain's not even really post-imperial, because the Commonwealth replaced its kind of empire, and it's still an extractive force when it comes to many of its colonial outposts, in particular those in Africa. So this whole idea of, oh, you know, we need to shed this post-colonial guilt. You've paid nothing, you've made no apologies, you've made no steps to repair, you've not helped to build anything, you've done nothing but just kind of like go, okay, yeah, well, we're done now, we're gonna leave. That's literally all. You kind of just exhausted your exploitative advantage. It's just exhausted now. That's it. And he said, oh, we need to shed the guilt. What guilt? This is the height. This is how racism works in the UK. Let's carry on. Biggar's book 2023, Colonialism, A Moral Reckoning, which examines the morality of colonialism, was initially accepted by Bloomsbury, but it chose not to publish it, with the suggestion that the public feeling on the subject does not currently support the publication of the book. Good on you, Bloomsbury. It was eventually published by HarperCollins, but that's great. And even, I'm sure HarperCollins is even bigger book publishing company. It shouldn't have been published, not because of the fact that it shouldn't have been published, not because of the fact that there was a public kind of like, what's the word? It was unsettling to the public, and it was kind of like morally distasteful. The reason it shouldn't have been published is because he did very little. You know, he just literally just kind of like gish galloped all of the positive, negative things, sorry, that were done by the British Empire, and he puts them into a single page in his book. Literally a single page. Okay. And then the rest of the time he's basically excusing the British Empire of any wrongdoing by constantly saying, well, we did this, but this happened 200 years ago. Or we did this here, but we didn't invent it. They've been doing that since here. Or we did this. So basically every wrongdoing, he's got a list of parallels of either ancient or future generations of people from different nations who had acts that either bore the same name or were similar, you know, somewhere in some ways analogous to what the British done. It's just the most disingenuous way to write a piece of work, to write a piece of literature. But anyway, let's carry on. The book has received both praise and criticism. Keenan Malik of The Guardian said that while colonialism claims to be a moral reckoning, moral questions are rarely taken seriously. And in seeking to challenge what he regards as cartoonish views of imperial history, what cartoonish views and where are they taught? Biggar has produced something equally cartoonish, exactly. A politicized history that ill serves his aim of defending Western values. Code speak, you know, that's a Western values is definitely a dog whistle for something else. Rudrangashu Mukherjee wrote in The Wire that colonialism is an immoral book that ignores the structural logic of empire, linking the development of capitalism and prosperity in Britain with the political control, the economic exploitation, and the impoverishment of the colonies, and that it fails the most elementary test of scholarship. Okay, let's start watching this interview now that we've got a little bit of a background on this character and who he is. And yeah, let's get into it. It's like I said, I think it's a really good showing by one Mehdi Hassan. So let's get into this and start enjoying some of this. Shout out, by the way, just if I could get some feedback from you guys about the level of the audio when I hit play. Hit 1 if you can hear it once the screen starts moving, or hit 2 if you can't hear it. Okay, so let me click play and get going.
Britain once ruled the biggest empire in human history. At its peak, it spanned a quarter of the globe and ruled over hundreds of millions of people. For some, the empire remains a symbol of national pride.
Thank you, Fabrice. I'll keep it rolling. Thank you, Kalugu. Okay.
But in recent years, there has been a resurgence of criticism of the empire across the Caribbean, Africa, Asia, and in Britain itself.
And we demand an apology and reparations.
Critics say the empire was built on racial discrimination, stolen land, and the mass murder and enslavement of millions. So, who gets to tell the story of Britain's empire? And should Britain have a reckoning with its sordid imperial past? My guest tonight is Emeritus Regius Professor.
Just a side note, nothing sickens me more than seeing the statues of colonialists still standing in colonies and just the general population just okay with it. You know, South Africa, I think, recently had their roads must go kind of thing. They were very late with that. And I'm not sure if they got rid of all of them. Now, people will instantly point the finger and say, well, you know, there's still statues of imperialists in the UK, but the UK is the UK. This is the home of empire. And it's almost wishful thinking to think that they would, you know, pull down their statues of, because these people, these are their forefathers, these are their heroes, these are the reason why Britain is the country it is today. It took their exploitation, it took their, and this is why you have people like him who have a romantic view of these people, because in essence, he's grateful for what they did. He doesn't care about how many people they slaughtered to get what they to do or to achieve what they did. He sits on his, you know, as Lord, you know, in Parliament, you know, probably sitting as Lord, you know, amongst acres and acres of land, in this and all of this ill-acquired wealth, which his ancestors and his family managed to essentially gain through the disadvantage, through the theft of others. And by the way, this is not just across the British Empire, this is on British land itself. So one of the topics that I cover in my documentary about slavery is the Enclosure Acts, where the land, essentially how Britain colonized itself, but the land of Britain was carved up into chunks, and essentially people with peerages like him, the House of the Lords in Parliament, carved it up, and they essentially just went around claiming the land in Britain, just claiming all of it. So a lot of people think, oh, well, you know, Britain's been built all over. Look at that massive population you have. Actually, most of Britain's population is concentrated to cities. So a large majority of Britain's population is concentrated quite densely into, you know, the major ports, you know, the major cities and the port cities. That's where you get loads and loads of people populated. Most of British land is still rural. Most of British land is still yeah, it's still undeveloped. And that rural land historically was subsistence land that was owned by the British people. It was land that they essentially used to farm on. Now, there was a period of time called primitive accumulation. Adam Smith writes, well, Karl Marx called it primitive accumulation. Adam Smith called it something else. But it was this period of time when they needed to transition the British population from their kind of subsistent communities into capitalist city communities that would work in the factories and would work for the lords, work for the super rich who owned all of the organizations. And the only way they could do that was by privatizing British land. So land that people grew up on was privatized. People were forced off their ancestral land that maybe they had been on for, you know, several generations. The entire British population was forced into capitalism. So, you know, it's funny that he's always going to be a defender of these historic, you know, Hitlerist people who went around the world enforcing this kind of this embracing of capitalism, forcing people into wage labor, because his ancestors are the beneficiaries of that. They were the ones who were doing the exploiting. The vast majority of us in the colonies and the poor British who think they are kin with this man, but they're idiots because they're poor and they're broke and they're destitute. And this man is the same man who, you know, his ancestors exploited their ancestors, but they're not aware of that.
Of Moral and Pastoral Theology at Oxford University, Nigel Biggar. He argues that the critics of the British Empire overstate its vices while ignoring its many virtues. I'm Mehdi Hassan, and tonight I'll go head-to-head with Nigel Biggar, a conservative peer. I'll challenge him on his defense.
And to be clear, Mehdi once again does a really good job. Just whilst it's in my mind, I'm going to just say it. The British Empire really was a conglomeration of corporations. That's what a lot of people miss. Whenever the British were operating within a nation, it's not like the British military and British forces and the British population were used to subdue, were used to colonize, but the profit always went through organizations. They would always operate them through companies. It would be the East India Company or the West India Company or the Dutch East India, or this and that company. They would always have a company who was operating, and because this was a profit thing, yeah, this was an extractive method. They weren't there for anybody's good. They weren't there to kind of settle or to grow, you know, a legitimate empire. They were there to extract resources, and a lot of people miss that. You know, when they try and come with these romantic views of history, they don't even understand that even the historic world didn't benefit the average Brit. Okay, it benefited the rich, it benefited the lords, but the average Brit is just like the average American right now, who they're romantic, they love it, but they don't actually realize that they should be fighting on the same side as the very people that they, you know, deride for not being white. But they're so hung up on white supremacy, which has been the tool of mind control. They don't realize that their ancestors were every bit the pawns, the serfs, when you look back through history.
Of empire and colonialism and his arguments against reparations for slavery. Tonight, I will also be joined by three experts. Gurminder Bamra, Professor of Historical Sociology in the Department of International Relations at the University of Sussex, Kojo Karam, Professor of Law and History at the University of Loughborough, and Lawrence Goldman, Fellow and Tutor in Modern History at St. Peter's College, Oxford University.
Another Oxfordite there. So I want you to bear that in mind. These two white historians, both Oxford University, and that is the very pinnacle of education or further education here in the UK, just to be clear. Higher education. Higher education. Let me get that right.
Nigel Biggar. Thank you so much for joining us on Head to Head tonight. The British Empire was the biggest in history, and under the empire, millions died in famines from Ireland to India, in massacres from Malaya to Kenya, in concentration camps in South Africa. The list goes on, as you know better than me.
And also, just be aware of the fact that a lot of the perspectives that come out, particularly in modern times, focus on the Oriental arm of the British Empire. And when I say the Orient, I'm talking more about the kind of like the East. So that's seen as, you know, your India, Middle East, China, Japan, Asia, obviously, and North Africa. Okay, so a lot of focus is given to those regions, which were also colonized, but it was a slightly different form of colonization. But it's just important to note that I would have liked to have seen more advocates for the African element, although it's raised here and it's kind of raised in passing and no one really digs down. So I've just thought I'd raise that perspective, but it's still a good and important argument that they have here.
But you say you felt compelled as an ethicist, not as a historian, to write your book, Colonialism, A Moral Reckoning, because you say there is, quote, a fairer.
The fact that he says he felt compelled as an ethicist tells me he either doesn't know what the word ethics means, or he's just completely morally bankrupt individual. For him to say that there's an ethical reason why, there's not ethics at all. Okay, trying to justify, you know, historical genocides because you identify with the people that committed it isn't an ethical argument. Do you understand? It's literally the opposite of an ethical argument that you're raising here.
More positive story to be told about the British Empire than the anti-colonialists want us to hear. Briefly, just to kick us off, what is that story?
So the first thing to say, Mehdi, is that empire and slavery and racism are universal phenomena practiced on every continent by people of every skin color. You can't find any 400-year long state, such as the British Empire was, that doesn't contain very bad stuff, and you've listed some of them there. But the British Empire chalked up some major liberal and humanitarian achievements that I don't want us to forget.
So you can already see here, and this is going to be the crux of the arguments that he makes. Okay, so first of all, he goes straight in and says, first of all, and he conflates empire, slavery, imperialism have all been conducted by almost every successful empire historically. And it's kind of like, okay, that's a major conflation. But not only is it a major conflation, it's a major oversimplification. Because what you'll find is people will often resort to a semantic argument. So when it comes to something like slavery, I've got this entire video where I explain that slavery, in essence, is a very lazy word because it exists on this massive spectrum. And so when you say to people, well, slavery has existed for thousands of years, which obviously it has, people perhaps whose ancestors were victims of extreme forms of slavery, like those in the Caribbean and those in the Americas, rightly will get offended and say, actually, no, chattel slavery, that was quite unique, and it was. But here's the issue. The issue is you have this overriding umbrella term, slavery, that's used to define everything. And I think it would be infinitely more helpful if we could actually give unique names to certain events. And the only people who seem to have been afforded or seem to continually get afforded that right is the little hat people in the Middle East. Yeah, they get to say, oh, you don't get to call what happened to us a genocide. We've got a name for it. It's the Holocaust. Yeah. So they got a name for it. And that name makes that act distinct in history. And I think it's important, so I think some people have called it the MAFA, okay, where, but that was just the process of transporting or moving people from Africa to the Americas. But let's talk about the actual event of chattel slavery that took place in the Americas, I think that event deserves its own name, because what that would do is it'll prevent people like him who are disingenuous from basically saying, "Oh well, what the British did is it's happened historically. Every empire has done it. We haven't done anything wrong, and actually we are the first people to actually abolish slavery." And this massive oversimplification that he does, they get away with it by playing with semantics. So it's just something to think about. Can we, as a community, actually start creating nomenclature around the events of our history so they stop getting conflated and thrown into stupid arguments like the one this man's raising? It's just something that came to mind.
For example, the British were among the first peoples in the history of the world to abolish slavery, then used imperial power for a century and a half to suppress slavery from Brazil to New Zealand. The British Empire also.
And also, I'm obviously going to speak about this. This whole idea that the British abolished slavery is one of the biggest misnomers. Okay, first of all, if you wanted to give a credit for someone, for a group, for actually ending the slave trade, that would have to go to the Ottomans, okay, or the Ruthenians / Russians, okay, because they were the first ones to block off the Black Sea. And I speak about the fact that historically the Black Sea slave trade, that area of the Black Sea, where basically the Slavs come from, the Eastern Europeans, or that entire kind of like surrounding area, that region was the greatest supplier, or it was the greatest kind of like resource for slaves globally for thousands of years. Okay, not for decades, not for centuries, for millennia. Okay, this dates back to pre-Herodotus times. So Herodotus wrote about this slave trade at 500 BC, and when he wrote about it, it was already very old. So slaves have been transported, and this is one of the reasons why North Africa looks the way it does, and different parts of the world have these kind of like more historic white presences, because basically these people were being transported from the Black Sea into parts of the world historically for a very long period of time. Now, this historic slave trade, which lasted for thousands of years, only came to an end when the Ottomans closed off the Black Sea and the Ruthenians supported them. So that period of the earth was closed off, and so they could no longer capture slaves. And I say capture, but they used to trade slaves as well. So they had to talk to that, obviously communicate with that population that they couldn't sell their own anymore, essentially. But when that was closed off, this is when a lot of the Barbary corsairs, so that's the people of North Africa, they ramped up their slave raids around the coastlines of Europe. So one of the things that's not spoken about by him, and it's missed by many historians, is that firstly, the first people to close off or abolish a slave trade were not the British. Okay, it would have been the Ottomans and the Ruthenians. The second thing is the reason the British were rushing to end or to close the slave trade was because the Barbary corsairs were taking slaves from around the British coast and the coasts of Europe. Okay, white slaves were being taken to North Africa in great number. And the third reason is because slavery in the colonies, such as in the Caribbean, had become incredibly unprofitable and incredibly dangerous, because the slave populations in those regions have become incredibly efficient at rebelling. And what you were finding is that the amount of money they needed to spend in terms of securing and maintaining security in those slave colonies meant they had very little profit coming from, and that was basically based around the sugar trade, because the Caribbean, the product of the Caribbean was sugar. And what you had was an increase of sugar also being produced in Europe using legitimate labor. So you had the beet sugar production taking place in Europe, and this was acting as a competitor. So that was driving down prices. And then on top of that, the enslaved populations of the Caribbean weren't having it no more. They were continually rebelling and being more and more successful in overthrowing these oppressive and barbaric British slave owners, who basically were working them to the bone, to get the to trade in sugar. So you had this basically you had this massive concoction of events taking place. Okay, you have the North Africans, the Barbary Corsairs, raiding Europe for slaves. On top of that, you have the closing of the Black Sea, which means that this now the transatlantic area becomes the major hub for slaves. But on top of that, those people who have been placed in the Caribbean, you can't keep them under control. These people are becoming incredibly adept at rebelling to the point where you're having to spend so much on security and losing to your competitors in Europe in terms of the sugar trade and the island of Hispaniola, which and Haiti, which was independent at that time as well, trading in sugar as well. It didn't look good for the future. So what was the solution to this? The solution to this was all of those corporation owners, because remember I said this is the British Empire is made up of corporations. All of these corporation owners, all of these individuals, his ancestors likely, they essentially got together and decided, hey, if we're gonna, let's call an end to slavery. And on top of calling an end to slavery, what we want is a massive payout. And that's exactly what they got. I'm sure we'll come on to that a bit more, but I just wanted to paint the picture a bit clearer when it comes to the abolition of the slave trade and Britain's alleged fight against to end slavery. A lot of that is being obfuscated. I've got a book here, which I'd advise you to perhaps invest in. And there's another book called White Cargo. This one's called White Gold, another book called White Cargo, but they will paint the picture very clearly that Britain's efforts to abolish the slave trade were wrapped up in the defeat of the North African Barbary Corsairs and the North African naval fleets, who at that time had control of the Mediterranean, but they won't speak about that. So they're hand in hand to Britain's abolition of the slave trade. The British also increased their maritime powers exponentially, and they became the strongest naval fleet in Europe as a result of the group that policed the waters of the Mediterranean and the Atlantic coast around Africa. They became the naval force of the world, the global. So it massively increased their power in and around Europe, and this is one of the reasons why you saw the Spanish and the Portuguese influence in the Americas reduced massively because the British increased their power massively. So that power vacuum was taken up by the British. So there's this whole background of the abolition of slavery, and none of it comes down to moralism. This is my point. None of it comes down to moralism. No British man turned around and, oh, this is such a crime against humanity. Oh, we must stop this, blah, 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 because a year, I always mention this, is what, a year after they abolished slavery in 1833, they committed one of the biggest genocides in history in the Australias. In 1834, they committed one of the biggest genocides in recorded history in Tasmania and the Australias. Humongous genocide. They did that a year later. So if it was for moral reasons that you stopped slavery, why the following year would you feel absolutely no regard for literally committing one of the biggest genocides in recorded history in the Australias? The two don't marry. And that's because what he's trying to do, like what many British people are trying to do, they're trying to revise Britain's position in history. Anyway, let me carry on.
So, committed itself to fighting the massively murderous genocidal regime in Nazi Berlin in 1939, and for 12 months between May 1940 and June 41, the empire offered Nazi Germany the only military resistance, with the sole exception of Greece. And
the only reason Britain got involved in the war against Nazi Germany, by the way, and Nazi Germany, I'm not being funny, but please don't try and paint me this, oh, they were demons. They're just Europeans, man. Yeah, respectfully, yeah, you call them the most evil, Hitler the most evil. I just call him another European. Okay, he was just another imperialist European. He behaved exactly like all of your leaders behave. He was no worse than Winston Churchill, no worse. And the only reason Britain got involved is because A, they were ordered to get involved, yeah, by the people who ran their financial systems, by the people who they were indebted to. By the way, Britain was in a massive debt, partially as a result of the slave bailout. In fact, massively as a result of the slave bailout, which was funded by the little hat people, by the you-know-who's. Okay, they're the ones who funded the slave bailout. And by the way, if you think that was a small thing, it wasn't. It was when the British paid the bailout to slave owners, it was 40% of Britain's GDP. Okay, I'm going to say that again, 40% of Britain's GDP. So they're going to give the figure later. The figure was 20 million pounds, which doesn't sound like a lot, but this was 40% of Britain's GDP. Okay, so that's like to be clear on what that looks like in today's figures. Bear in mind, its empire was bigger. So in terms of global turnover, Britain's turnover as a nation was bigger proportionately then than it is now. Now, 40% of GDP in today's value, I think Britain's GDP is, I hope I don't get this wrong. I think it's about 4 trillion, between 3 and 4 trillion. Feel free to look it up, someone, for me. I think Britain's GDP at the moment is between 3 or 4 trillion. So if we were going to say 4% of Britain's GDP, we're talking clean over a trillion. Yeah. 1.2 trillion, 1.3. That's what we're looking at in today's value. So we're talking about they turned these groups of people who owned and trafficked humans into literally overnight oligarchs. Like they made them stupidly rich. This was the motivation. This was the driving factor. This was the bottom line behind the reason why they felt the need to intervene and to end the slave trade, because it made a few people, likely his ancestors, inexorbitantly rich. That's how it worked, you know?
The empire has produced, according to the World Value Survey 2023, 3 of the least racist countries on earth: Britain, Australia, and Canada, in sharp contrast to Russia.
Did he just say Britain's one of the 3 least racist countries? He just said Britain, Australia, and Canada are 3 of the least racist countries on the planet. Britain, Australia, and Canada are 3 of the least racist nations on the planet. Australia, is he serious? Australia, see, Australia, it's hard for Australia to be racist because when the Brits, those British convicts, were sent over from indentured servitude and whatever other things they were doing in the UK to colonize Australia, they unalived everybody. So that's why they're not racist, because there's no one to be racist to. Just the handfuls of the remnants of the original Aboriginal population, who most have been bred out or interbred through, obviously we know that you conducted your rabbit-proof fence policies and made sure that there was barely any, if any, pure Aboriginal blood left. So all of the Aboriginal populations are largely mixed as a result of forced and unforced miscegenation that took place as part of a British policy in the Australias. This is why modern Aboriginals all have that kind of more Asian look now. The historic Aboriginals are darker than me, way darker than me, like jet black people, the original Aboriginal population that were replaced. So you go there, you wipe everyone out, and then as a result of wiping everyone out, we say, oh, we have racial harmony here. This is one of the least racist people. That's because there's a bunch of white people in the part of that world that don't belong there. What are you talking about, mate? This guy's a real demon, man.
China and Iran.
Oh, and by the way, shout out to Kelugu, who said, so Britain's GDP, 3.04 trillion as of 2025. So in modern times, we're talking about 1.2, 1.3 trillion. 1.3 trillion paid out to these slave owners from the British, and Britain didn't end up paying off that debt until early 2000s. So it took Britain 180 years to pay off that debt to the you-know-who's, the little hat people, which is why those people were telling them which wars they are and are not going to participate in, because the debt was huge. But that's neither. So there was 2 families that funded it. It was it was the Montefiore family, which is a you-know-who-ish family, and the Rothschilds. So the Rothschilds and the Montefiore family were the ones who funded the British slavery bailout. So these are the parts of history they don't want to tell you. They want to, shine a torch out their backside and act like they've done something fantastic. And when in reality, everything they've done has been for some kind of financial exploitation, some kind of extractive measure.
In your book, Colonialism, A Moral Reckoning, you list various motivations you say drove the British Empire, like the lure of adventure, a desire to make peace and establish self-government. You say there's nothing wrong with these innocent, in some cases you say admirable intentions. I do wonder though, for example, did Cecil Rhodes, the British colonial founder of Rhodesia, did he have good intentions when he said he preferred African land to Africans, who he called the N-word, and when he wrote, Africa is still lying ready for us, it is our duty to take more territory. More territory simply means more of the Anglo-Saxon race, more of the best, the most human, the most honorable race the world possesses.
Yeah. So I don't defend Cecil Rhodes. I wouldn't present him as a poster boy of the British Empire.
You have defended him.
Well, partial defense.
So this is disgusting. I'm going to jump on this in a second. Let me just quickly give a shout out to, thank you very much, All One Page. Appreciate the $5 donation, and I appreciate you supporting the research and discussion. You said, been watching this channel for a while and have subbed to all others. I like the fact that you put a 2 there because there's 2 others. Appreciate it. Last month was good for me, selling cars in Omaha. Shout out to you. So I'm a channel member now. Boom. Look what I just did in my hands. I did that with my hands, and I thought, if I do that, they're gonna start saying I'm Illuminati. That was an accident, by the way, guys. I just wanted to kind of like go, whoa, ho, ho, there. I'm not Illuminati. Shout out to you. I appreciate it. I have to clear that up because someone will freeze frame that, and then on Twitter, I told you so. He's a demon. No, I'm not. Okay, I'm not. I don't do any of that nonsense. Yeah, but shout out to you, All One Page. I appreciate it. And yeah, welcome to the channel as a member. You are appreciated. Let's feel free to join Page. This is not too lonely. The channel membership on this channel, the King Mono show, is very, very scant, so we could do with a few more supporters. So feel free to join Page there. Shout out to you. Appreciate you. So yeah, let's jump onto this demonic thing that he's just said here. Yeah, this idea that Cecil Rhodes is a kind of like a moral quandary. There's a question mark. Oh, Cecil, I neither defend nor condemn him. Cecil Rhodes is literally a demon. He's like the amount of deaths he's responsible for in Southern Africa. And I say Southern Africa because his acts weren't restricted to South Africa. Obviously, we know that Zimbabwe historically was called Rhodesia, named after Cecil Rhodes. He was one of the most barbaric people when it came to the treatment of black people. And to be clear, one of the reasons why I have massive respect for my Zimbabwean brothers and sisters, because everyone looks at South Africa and talks about how complex it is. Oh, you can't just kick the farmers out, this, that, and the other. I think even after abolition, at its height, I think ownership of land by the white South Africans versus the natives was, I think, around between 85 and 89%. In Zimbabwe, the white ownership of arable land was over 99%, and they made up 1%, less than 1% of the population. So the whites in Zimbabwe had over 99% of the arable land, and they made up less than 1% of the population. They literally were treating that population like slaves right up until 1998 when Mugabe got rid of them. And a lot of people think, oh, they've given the land back now. I'm not going to cover that now, but I'm just going to throw this out very quickly. There was compensation paid for, I think it was 67 farms that had been disused, and people have run with this. The media has run with this. Oh, they're giving them the land back and they're paying them back and they're begging them to come back. No, people need to understand there are hundreds of thousands of farms in Zimbabwe. Hundreds of thousands of farms. Okay, hundreds of thousands of farms were transferred were given, farmers who were just on the land with leases were given deed ownership, indigenous farmers. So if you look at the recent reforms that have been made to the farming in Zimbabwe, it's been overwhelmingly weighted towards granting full ownership to black farmers. Now, the 67 farms that were basically some compensation money was paid out wasn't owned by British. Yeah, remember the British were the ones who colonized. Those 67 farms were owned by other Europeans who had purchased them from the British. So the difference is you didn't have that historic backdrop of basically acquiring the land through unjust means or violence. They came as legitimate traders, and they purchased land from the British. Now, obviously, historically, it didn't belong to the British to sell, but it did create this kind of like moral question mark. What do we do with these lands? And the Zimbabwean government, rightly or wrongly, decided to compensate these other European nations who had purchased the land but had not acquired the land through colonialism. Now, there was tens of thousands of farms that fell under this. Of those tens of thousands where they were compensated, in other words, paid for the land but did not get the land back, there were these 67. Now, the 67 in question were basically unused. Okay, so please listen to this point. The 67 in question had remained unused. So these, bear in mind, this is out of hundreds of thousands of, so this is less than 0.01% of the arable land in Zimbabwe. These 67 farms had remained unused, so they had fallen into disrepair. So the Zimbabwean government said, since we seized this land from you and it's fallen into disrepair, we're going to compensate you what you should have been paid because you did purchase this land, but we're also going to ask you to come back and to farm these 67 lands, because the Zimbabwean government, rightly or wrongly, says it's better that these lands are utilized than them basically falling into disrepair. Now, bear in mind, hundreds of thousands of farms have been utilized and utilized well, but these 67, they've allowed European, not British, to be clear, farmers to come back and to farm those lands, and they've compensated them for it. That's what's happened in the recent changes in Zimbabwe in terms of them calling back these European farmers, because there was no one in the African population who was doing anything with these farms. That's what took place. It's a tiny fraction of the land. And by the way, even though they've called them back, they can't own them. So they've got written into law that these European farmers who they've called back cannot own the farms. They can only farm on them, which is why they've paid them some money, some compensatory money to get these farms productive again, to get these farms producing again. Now, there's many reasons why they've done this. First of all, we know they're being sanctioned heavily. So showing some kind of like, you know, flexibility in terms of the way they have diplomacy with these former farm owners is important. A lot of the European nations were, for want of a better word, butthurt about the fact that, hey, we're not the British, we didn't colonize you, and you've kicked us off our farms for being white. And I think Zimbabwe did the right thing in saying, okay, no, you're right, you paid for it, we can pay you back what you paid for these lands or whatever, or it's not even what you paid. What they've paid them for is the improvement they brought to the land. So they said the land can't even be a part of the transaction. By the way, all of this you can review. It's been posted on the herald.co.za website. So that's Zimbabwe's official website. And all of this comes from the very mouth of Anxious, whatever his name is, who's the foreign minister. Okay. He says all of this. So he says basically what they've paid them for is for the improvements they brought to the land. But this entire discussion about land ownership, nothing has changed. Only Zimbabweans can own land in Zimbabwe. And that's not going to change. We're not giving this land to any people, any outsiders. Okay. And these 67 lands, we shouldn't even talk about them. They wouldn't make the news in any other circumstance. But for the Europeans, it's such a victory. Oh, Zimbabwe, go call back the white farmers. Zimbabwe gave back land. It's like, is that your victory? We should be laughing at this. They have hundreds of thousands of farms, like over 300,000 farms in Zimbabwe. And you're shouting for victory because 67 that were in complete disrepair, they've called them back to come and till the land. It's ridiculous. So I just wanted to be clear on that. Feel free, if you feel you can challenge anything I've said, bring your receipts, because I've read about this quite extensively, and I'm pretty sure what I've told you is correct. But feel free to challenge if you want to. But I just want to clear up, that's what's happened in Zimbabwe. That was a side quest. Let me give a shout out to Macy. Appreciate you, Macy. How you doing, sister? She says, keep up the good work. Thank you very much, Macy, and I appreciate your continual and ongoing support of the work and the research. Macy has been a foundational member, by the way, guys. Okay, she's a foundational King's Monologue American. Sorry, I got a stupid sense of humor. Yeah, she's a foundational member, and she's essentially helped to fund this research and fund my work from the very ground up. And I really appreciate people like her, because people do not realize when your channel's suppressed how little support I get from YouTube in terms of how much work I put in. So I really do rely on people who are continual and generous supporters of the work. So I appreciate you, Macy. Just want to throw that out there. But anyway, I hope that was informative for you. So anyway, his defense of Cecil Rhodes is absolutely deplorable to me, because Cecil Rhodes was an absolute demon. They stole land all across Southern Africa. They plunged those people from basically self-sustaining lifestyles into essentially not being able to feed themselves, being slaves on their own land, with these undeserving white barbarians owning everything, and them living in these rough, townships. And he's an abhorrent human being. And that's not even to talk about the amount of genocides that were committed by the British in that region. So this is him defending them is obviously what I expect. But then this is why we can't have sensible conversations with characters like these, because there's no moral guidance here. The whole idea that he's arguing this from an ethical perspective is just insulting.
He wasn't South Africa's Hitler. He didn't commit genocide in South Africa. Was he racist? If he was a racist who opposed the removal of the vote from black South Africans in Cape Colony, and his famous Rhodes scholarships. In his will, he made clear these scholarships were to be granted regardless of race. People disagree about what he meant by that.
And this is one of those really irritating, disingenuous arguments. Okay, the Rhodes Scholarship, he wants it to be granted to everyone regardless of race, and Mehdi rightly pulls him up and says, yeah, actually it's because he was open for it being granted to people, the coloreds. Okay, it was never his intention for it to be given to the native population, who he saw as being essentially subhuman. Okay, but you don't want to mention that, and now you want to posthumously give him praise for the fact that black people are benefiting from the Rhodes Scholarship, and that's probably as a result of black people engaging in politics and forcing them to say, either we're going to apply this scholarship. And I know that the Rhodes Scholarship has been subject to the Black economic empowerment laws in South Africa, which has forced them to open up those kinds of doors. All right. So it's black people actually being politically infusing themselves into politics and forcing the hands of these colonialists that have made those changes, not because Cecil Rhodes was a good person. And they always try and grant their heroes, because let's be very, very clear. These genocidal, murderous, barbarian admirals and leaders who conducted themselves and committed the worst crimes against our ancestors, that's their heroes. The people who unalived our ancestors are their heroes. Those are the people that they're always going to hold in the highest esteem. And so you have to be very, very clear, like, our enemies are not their enemies. We do not share anything. So when people try and force this kind of, like, for instance, AH hate, you know what I'm talking about, AH, yeah? I don't care about AH. He doesn't offend me in the slightest. And that's the honest truth. I couldn't care less about him. Oh, he was such a monster. Oh, he unalived it. He could have unalived 500 million Europeans. Not my business. That's your business, because it's you guys who are unaliving my ancestors. I care about who armed me. So if I had it my way, I would bring back AH over Cecil Rhodes 100 times. 100 times. Who would you like to bring back from the dead? Cecil Rhodes or AH? I would choose AH, because AH is your enemy, not my enemy. Oh, what kind of a world would we live in if we didn't win the war? What kind of a world do we live in right now? I don't think AH could have done much worse than you guys are doing at the moment. So respectfully, miss me with that nonsense, because he learned all of his abhorrent behavior from the Americans, from the British. That's where he learned to be a fascist from. So I don't know who you guys think you're kidding with this bollocks.
Within 4 years of his death, the first African-American Rhodes Scholar was appointed. Rhodes, I've made quite clear, Rhodes is a mixed bag. He wasn't a saint, but he wasn't a devil. He was a buccaneer.
Well, buccaneer. He wasn't a saint, but he was a devil. This is the most ridiculous, like, this is like the most ridiculous argument that you could be. Oh, he wasn't a saint, he wasn't a devil. He was a devil. Just like your ancestors are a devil, just like you're a devil. Okay? Just like Maggie Thatcher, who backed apartheid, was a devil. You guys are you're so soft, you're so understanding, you're so placating when it comes to anyone who is historically British, as though they couldn't have done no wrong because it benefited you. You're not able to see them through the lens that the rest of the world sees them through.
Very general assessment though, of a man who's considered to be a kind of deeply dishonorable person in the way he led his life and the way he had. When you say he wasn't a saint and wasn't a sinner, wasn't a devil, I mean, that could apply to anyone in this room. And people in this room haven't said ridiculous things about natives should be subjected to British rule.
Yeah.
I mean,
and he didn't just say ridiculous things. Just to be clear, Cecil Rhodes' acts aren't restricted to rhetoric, like many could argue. A lot of AH's acts were restricted to. His words were rhetoric with action. Okay, he did everything he said. He enacted everything he said. AH wasn't really that successful. He had a few years of expansion, okay, and then he was thoroughly beaten militarily. Cecil Rhodes did exactly what he wanted to do. He enslaved exactly who he wanted to enslave. He unalived exactly who he wanted to unalive. He stole land from exactly who he wanted to steal land from. So let's not, this is the thing, they don't care. We have to understand something. These people do not care about us. They don't care about our ancestors. They do not view us on the same plane of existence as they view one another. And we have to understand that very, very clearly. This is very symptomatic of the British mindset. Like one of the rhetorics, I don't know if you guys got this, in those of you who aren't in the UK, when the Russia-Ukraine war started, the British advertised it as the first war since this is the first war since World War II. The first war since World War II. I'm like, what do you mean the first war since World War II? What are you talking? What they meant was this is the first time white people have been fighting amongst themselves since World War II. That's what they meant, okay? Because to them, this is the first time since World War II that actually there's a risk of white people being unalived. When they see all these, when we're invading Iraq, Libya, Mali, Ivory Coast, whenever they're sending troops to Haiti, whenever they're sending troops to these black nations, they never feel any kind of like fear of their own mortality. There's no, that's why they're able to mourn every single loss, you know, every single, so oh, we lost 3 soldiers in Iraq today, like 3, you unalived 1.5 million. Do you know what I mean? We lost a handful here and a dozen there. They're able to do that because they're not even expecting to lose life. They're not expecting for there to be any cost when they do that. So when they had 2 white nations fighting each other, suddenly the prospect of more than 100 white people dying in a conflict hits them, and it's like, oh my God, Europe's at war. These people are demonic. Do you understand?
It's a very soft assessment. I mean, we wouldn't say that about other dictators, tyrants, killers throughout history.
No, of course.
And you take this approach to a lot of colonial leaders.
In Rhodes's case, I'm responding to the kinds of things that those who are clamoring for Rhodes's statue in Oxford to fall.
They were clamoring for Rhodes's statue to fall. Yeah, for good reason. For good reason. His statue is offensive to many people. Okay, when you have the statue of someone who unalived hundreds of thousands, if not millions, took land that didn't belong to him, you know, forget the, also not to add the amount of people that would have lost life to starvation, displacement, okay, created one of the most, I wouldn't say created, I would say contributed to one of the worst, I wouldn't say a conflict zone, but one of the most politically tumultuous areas in the world due to this kind of racial caste system that he was very much an architect of, responsible for all of that. And then you're, oh well, I oppose the statue being brought down because, but probably because you've probably directly, I would even probably say directly benefited from that exploitation because you don't care. We are not of the same kin.
South Africa's Hitler, guilty of genocide, white supremacist. None of those things are simply true. There are elements of truth in them, but not simply true. No, so I do defend Rhodes, but it's a critical defense.
It's a weird defense, though. It's a defense to say, you said twice now, he's not South Africa's Hitler.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Nazis a couple of times.
Well, yeah, that's because...
Well, he is, first of all. He is. And I would say, you know, once again, the Hitler analogy, you can miss me with that because, yeah, whatever. Who is Hitler? Who's worse, Hitler or Mussolini? Go and look at how many people Mussolini unalived in Libya and Ethiopia, and then compare that to Hitler's numbers and tell me who's worse. Why is only one? Who's worse, Hitler or King Leopold II? Okay, who's worse? Their demons are never. Who's worse, Hitler or Cecil Rhodes? Once again, this conversation we're having. But when they unalive us in mass number, they don't even make the history books as the worst people in history. They don't even make the history books because our lives. And by the way in which Europeans unalived us was far more barbaric than what took place on the European continent. And this is not to make these kind of like, make a comparative analysis. It's to simply say, no, they weren't just unaliving us. When you see the pictures in the Congo of, you know, a man wearing a necklace with his daughter's severed hands around his neck that he's been forced to wear by a Belgian officer. You can't, there's no analogy for that in Auschwitz. There's no analogy for that on the European continent. So respectfully, once again, miss me with this BS. Your heroes are not our heroes. Your enemies are not our enemies.
Because its critics do.
But in the book, I think about a dozen times you said the British Empire was not Nazi Germany, which I'm not going to argue with you tonight about.
No, but many do.
Many do, but it's a very low bar to say we were not the Nazis, right? As a moral philosopher, I'm sure you understand that point.
I get that.
And I would also add, by the way, the Nazis themselves were fans of the British Empire, as you know. I mean, Hitler said we should learn from the English. Yep. Hitler said he had sincere admiration for the immeasurable colonizing work of the British Empire. Not a great endorsement, I would say.
No, indeed. Let me just make clear what the appeal to Nazism, what part it plays in the argument against the British Empire. The argument against the British Empire is, if you look through history, it contained both good and bad. Okay. But what the critics say is, well, it doesn't matter how many bridges the British built in India or canals they developed, whatever. It was essentially racist, essentially genocidal, in the same way that it doesn't matter the fact that Hitler...
Okay, so he's making the argument of infrastructure, which is one of the biggest arguments that you'll hear made by people, proponents of the British Empire, proponents of colonialism and imperialism. Oh, whilst we were there, what about the bridges and the canal? First of all, every bridge, every canal, every railway, you can see Sosa in the chat there because he always wants attention. Sosa, just behave yourself and talk respectfully because, you know, I won't tolerate anything less than that. Yeah, every bridge, every canal, every railway that has been built by the British or imperial forces was for their own benefit. And it's like they do this and they expect some kind of praise, some kind of, oh, thank you for building these things, but you built that to transport goods. You built that to extract. I did a rather it wasn't even extensive, but you can have a look at the legacy, the colonial legacy of railway systems in Africa, which is one of the things they like to fall back on so much. Oh, we built these railways in Africa. Oh, they were so amazing. The railways literally go from the inside to the coast. Okay. It's not a effective or useful railway for anything other than extraction. That's why it looks like, if you look at the colonial railways, they look like a river system. It's just like lots of paths literally going from the interior of the continent to the coast. So they built the railways to transport goods from the wherever they were stealing from, whatever they were stealing. And by the way, they were stealing a lot, to be clear, a lot of things that you won't hear about because of Operation Legacy, but they were stealing far more than what they've told you that they were stealing. Yeah, and this includes architecture. But from the interior of Africa to the coast, so it could be put on a ship and then shipped to Europe. Yeah, it's the same thing for everything they built. They built it for their own uses. Now he's trying to argue, and like many British people will argue, that us building those things was a moral plus or moral addition. It's kind of like, no, it's not. That's what you built to. That's what you built to benefit your empire. You know, no one's going back historically and praising, you know, the Romans were so good because so good to the people of this nation that they colonized because they built an aqueduct here or they built a castle here. It's kind of like, no, that's just those are the hallmarks of empire. An empire comes and builds things that are useful to them until eventually that empire is overthrown. You don't deserve praise for that. Okay. And you still will be condemned and deserve condemnation for the atrocities that you committed. That's just normal. But what they're trying to do is this very disingenuous thing where they want to be praised for every little crummy contribution that they made in terms of, you know, things that are, even though a lot of people won't talk about the things that they destroyed in order to build the things that they built. They won't talk about who did the building, who did they put to work, who actually put one stone on top of the other. So they talk about, oh, well, the British came here and they built this, they built that. It's like, I'm sorry, but directing construction is not the same as building, to be clear. So if you went there and actually all the people who did the labor, not only that, all of the local materials and stuff like that was sourced locally, and then you built this structure or you forced the slaves to build this, you think you deserve praise for that because you got them to build something that made it more efficient for you to extract resources. This is the asinine way in which their mind thinks, you know?
Yeah.
Had a hand in developing the Volkswagen,
yes,
or whatever. Auschwitz, there's no compensation for Auschwitz. And all I'm saying is, okay, the British Empire did contain both good and bad, but there was nothing akin to the massively racist, genocidal intent of building.
As a moral philosopher and theologian, you would agree that not being the Nazis shouldn't be the bar. Right, you can be an evil empire and still not be the Nazis. But Saddam Hussein could say, yeah, I gassed the Kurds, but I'm not Hitler. Yeah. We would still say Saddam was an evil man.
The point is...
I disagree regarding Saddam there as well. I think that's a massive oversimplification. And also that was very prone to Western propaganda. I'm just going to throw that out there, by the way. I don't think Saddam did half the things. Many of the things that they claim Saddam did, which they said they'd prove as a result of the Iraq war, these alleged mass graves, they didn't find any of them. So all of these accusations towards Saddam's would have left some kind of a material legacy that people will be able to trace. So they used to make all of these accusations about, oh yeah, he's got these people, this many thousand people imprisoned here. He unalived this many people there. They went to those places, they were empty. There was no prisons, there was no thing. So all of it was just propaganda. And yet we're still kind of like living under the legacy of these false narratives that have been created. And one of the reasons why, I just have to throw this out, I know I'm being slightly, tangential here, but one of the reasons I'm throwing this out is because I've currently got a series. By the way, I got a premiere today, guys. Please watch it on my main channel, King's Monologue. It's the third part to the series that I'm doing on the Reserved Heads. If you want to watch the full documentary, or member, you probably would have watched it already. But if not, please watch the third installment. It's a very good piece. But the reason that I mention that is because a lot of what we believe is based on narratives that were put in place by people who had agendas, by racists. They put these narratives in place, and then these narratives are just parroted. And this is exactly what's happened, for instance, with Saddam here. A narrative was put in place, normally by the imperial powers that wanted to remove him, the Western powers that didn't like Saddam, didn't like the fact that Saddam was trying to get rid of the petrodollar, didn't like the fact that Saddam was moving OPEC towards independence. Okay, these are all things that Saddam was doing. Didn't like the fact that Saddam was trading to try to basically reduce US the power of the US dollar in terms of trading petrol and trading in refined oils, and in refined petrol. So they didn't like all of those things. And as a result, they said, we need to remove this guy. And the first part of removing someone is always to demonize them. So you have these rumors being parroted about, just like they said about Iran the other day. Oh, the other day, Iran killed 30,000 people. When? Where? Where's the evidence of this? They don't provide any evidence. But then what happens is one person says it, and another person quotes that person, and another person quotes that person. All of a sudden now they've become this circular self-reinforcing circle of false narratives, which is what they do. They do all the time. So even going back, oh, Saddam was a monster, Saddam was evil. It's like, really? Was he? You haven't proven that. You invaded Iraq a long time ago, and you still haven't proven that Saddam was a monster. So now I'm not going to sit here and agree with you that Saddam killed 50,000 Kurds and he tested chemical, but because they didn't prove any of this. It's all bollocks. They never prove any of this stuff. They never prove any of it. None of it's true. They'll say this crap, unalive our leaders, and then they'll justify it posthumously and say like, oh yes, well, we had to get rid of him. He was a monster. People are saying that about Maduro. People who didn't even know Maduro's name the other day are like, oh yeah, Maduro's a monster. Maduro had to go. It's like, you didn't even know Maduro. I didn't know that Venezuela's leader was called Maduro. I lost track of Venezuela after they unalived Chavez. I kind of like lost track of Venezuela's politics. Now everyone's acting like they knew what Maduro is a drug dealer. Is this, that? No, you don't know what you're talking about. You're just parroting the West. And we have to come out of that mindset and start thinking for ourselves and doing our own research and seeing actually, are they able to qualify? Are they able to quantify? Are they able to provide citations for these claims about these mass unalivements of people? Because most of the time they are not true.
The argument made by the critics is the British Empire was essentially evil, and I say no, it wasn't essentially evil. It was a mixture of good and bad. There were elements of racism. I think that's a straw man. A lot of historians of empire do not say essentially evil. They point out the sheer quantity of evil they've done that we don't talk about, Nigel. You teach at Oxford. I studied at Oxford. I went to school in the UK. I think people in this audience in London would agree. In this country, you're taught about the Tudors and the Nazis. I can tell you about how many wives Henry the...
That's absolutely true what you said there as well. And this is the thing, you'll find this is a alt-right argument that's being made. No, we just need to stop talking about it. Oh, we've beaten ourselves up enough about our role. What are you talking about? No one talks about it. No one talks about the immoral acts that the British can do. That's why you have to do your own research to find out exactly what happened during the period of imperialism, colonialism, the kind of effects that it had on the various colonies, the amount of people. None of this I was taught in school. None of this is, no one in the UK is taught any of this. I said they're acting like they're being beaten over the back because they've heard one Caribbean politician turn around and say, can we have some reparations for the evil things you did? Oh my God, when will you guys stop talking about this? When will you stop putting this up? Haven't we suffered enough? Haven't we suffered enough? It's like, what are you talking about? No one's talking about this stuff. I don't understand where this comes. Well, you do, because these people don't want to be accountable or held accountable for anything. They don't want to be held accountable for anything. You know, and it's kind of funny when you raise these kinds of topics. So you talk about something, and then people always inevitably come in comments. Oh yeah, everyone knows that already. It's like, no, they don't. Respectfully, don't come on try and gaslight me on my channel talking about, oh yeah, everyone knows. No one knows it. If everyone knew it, then I wouldn't have to make a video about it. I'll react to it or respond to it. These things aren't being spoken about. And when they are being spoken about, you're trying to shut them down using this very narrative. It's very frustrating.
The 8th ad. I was not taught about the Mau Mau massacre. I was not taught about the Amritsar massacre. I was not taught about British concentration camps in South Africa. It's actually the opposite of what you're saying. We've actually covered up our rather sordid and evil imperial past.
And nothing proves Mehdi's point more effectively than the fact that the only reason we know that Operation Legacy took place. The only reason we know that Operation Legacy took place is because of the case that the Mau Mau brought against the British Parliament, against the British government. The Mau Mau brought a case against the British government, and it was during that case that they managed to find a few hundred of these documents, and those documents actually mention the process of Operation Legacy, which was the complete and utter destruction of documentation prior to the exiting of the British. It was the most illegal act committed in history. When British and other European states, so it wasn't limited to Britain, but when European states were finally forced out of the African continent, they burnt everything. So everything that we think we know about colonialism and imperialism is just a tiny smidgen of what actually survived. And when they burnt documentation, it wasn't just their own. They burnt the native documentation. They burnt evidences of writing. They burnt evidence of deconstructing those local populations. They burnt everything. And the reason they gave was they didn't want anything to be released that would cause embarrassment to the crown in the future. You can read about this. So what they've done is they've done the most heinous thing that's probably ever been done in history, in that we can't even trace their crimes. We can't trace what they erased. We don't truly know what the state of many of these nations were when they were first colonized. And this is one of the reasons why I say these various extraction methods that they built, such as the railways, the things that they were stealing, we don't even know what they were taking back to the UK, because they've burnt everything. They either burnt the documents or they dropped their documents into the sea. They had two methods, and they speak about these in this literal handful of documents. They said that the burning in many of, I think they talked about in Kenya. I think one of the examples was in Kenya, the amount of burning that they did was so extensive. When you walked, I think they talked about when you walked around the British consulate, you were knee-high in ash. Knee-high in ash. Do you understand that? Knee-high in ash. This is how much they burnt. These people they rampaged, and they got rid of every evidence of what they did. So that's what makes this entire discussion even more insidious, is that, first of all, I wouldn't expect Nigel Biggar to know about Operation Legacy or even care, because that's not going to be advantageous to the narrative that he's trying to push. So he's got to pretend that he's never heard of it or that it doesn't exist. But the fact of the matter is, this is what makes it even more insidious, because we don't even know the crimes. The crimes that we know of are bad enough for us to condemn the British Empire. If we truly knew what they have actually done in Africa, if we truly knew what they have actually done throughout their colonies across Asia, the Caribbean, Australia's, Oceania, God knows, God only knows. These people are insanely wicked. So when you have people like this is what you call kind of like offense is the best form of defense, so to speak, when they go on the offensive like this. And they're like, oh, I'm so insulted. People keep bringing up what you should be doing is praising us. It's like, this is like the ultimate gaslight. It's the ultimate gaslight. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is what they do. They're pushing against, and this is a tactic that's used quite effectively by the little hat people, if you know what I'm talking about as well, where literally you could sneeze and they go, oh, that's anti-esthetism. Literally just sneeze the wrong way, and they go, oh yeah, no, we're not gonna have any of that. And what they're doing is they're attacking you, because they don't want you actually getting to the root of the problem. They want you up here arguing about things like that were obviously bad, like slavery, and then saying, well, let's have a debate about slavery. It wasn't really bad. Let's have a bit of a back and forth. And what they're trying to do, and effectively are doing, is keeping you from actually getting under the rug of what really took place, what was really taken, what was really stolen, how many people really died, how much they really owe. That's what they don't want you getting to.
I don't think that's fair. I mean, for God's sake,
you think most British people know about all those massacres I just mentioned?
No, but most people know barely any history at all. For example, if we learn about the 150 years, mainly 150 years, in which some British people were involved in enslaving Africans, that's fine. Can we also hear about the abolition movement?
Yes,
and the 150
and I
years
promise
of...
that tonight we're going to talk about slavery.
Yeah.
Right now, just on Rhodes, it's interesting you said he's not South Africa's Hitler. Hitler was a fan of Rhodes, the man you're saying is a mixed man. Goebbels praised him by name.
Maybe Hitler was a fan of Mozart. That doesn't make Mozart bad.
No, but but maybe he was a fan of Mozart. Well,
And he thinks that that's such a, oh, maybe Hitler was a fan of Mozart. That doesn't make Mozart great. Well, Mehdi deals with him here. I don't even need to come here. Mehdi hits him with the ultimate bar here.
great line, but let's just think that through. Maybe he was a fan of Mozart for his music, and maybe he was a fan of Rhodes for being an imperialist who killed non-white people.
It's not clear to me, maybe, what that says about...
See, there you go. There's not really. Let's see what the argument or the pushback is here, okay? Because it clearly that's he's going to find it incredibly difficult to argue with that sentiment. Okay, it's very clear. He praised Rhodes just like Hitler praised almost exclusively the British Empire and the Americans, who are the winners of World War II that we should be grateful for. They learned everything they learned about fascism from these two nations. These are the most evil, heinously racist nations on the planet, and we're supposed to be grateful that they, they succeeded. But let's see what his response is.
Rhodes. I mean, Hitler's
He's a
view...
pretty bad guy, I would say. I mean, the problem you have, Nigel, is this is what you do in the book.
So there was no response there. He's just grateful now that they've moved on from that point. There's no response and no defense, and that's why he's not going to try and push back on that.
You say I'm looking at good and evil, but when you look at a lot of colonial leaders, you present them in the best possible light. Let me give you an example. And people accuse you of cherry picking. You know this because you've responded to your critics at length in the book. For example, you praise a colonial leader like the first Marquis of Hastings, who was Governor General of India. And you quote him saying that he wanted to promote the, quote, happiness of the vast population of the country. And you praise him for saying that. Great line. That's a quote from his diary, which you quote from. In that same diary, he says that Hindus in India are limited to, quote, mere animal functions with no higher intellect than a dog might be supposed to capable of attaining. Strange that you didn't include that quote in your book.
I didn't include that quote, but you can find other quotes similar to it, so I don't deny...
I mean, it completely undermines the idea of the Marquis of Hastings as some great believer in egalitarianism and racial equality.
And this is one of the things that you'll see is there'll always be some kind of justification for people with the most morally abhorrent personalities and who say the most evil and wicked things. And to be clear, they always try to present, these scientific racists as though they use the argument of, they use the argument of kind of like anachronism as an excuse in saying that, well, for the time it was the normal way to speak. And actually, a lot of that is false as well. These people were, even in their own time, the most racist people that there were. Yeah, they were literally the most racist people that they were. And yet they give each other and they give themselves a pass. They give each other and they give themselves a pass. That's literally what they do. And that's what you'll find incredibly infuriating with people like this, because they're basically not going to condemn any of these people. That's the one thing you have to be clear. They're not going to condemn any of their historical heroes. They're not going to condemn their ancestors. They're not going to condemn the people that enriched them and who gave them a position of advantage. They won't condemn them. It doesn't matter what they say.
Not entirely, Mehdi, because most of us are moral mixtures and we're not consistent. I don't condone the stuff you've just read out from his diary. People can read the book and find that I quote other people saying equally abhorrent racist things. My argument is, yes, the British Empire contained racism, as does any human society. And let's be clear here, racism was not an invention of the British or Europeans. Lots of Africans have racist views of other Africans.
Straight to Africans. So this is why I know this guy is right out of the same, born out of the same belly as Simon Webb. Yeah, so let's just be clear. Yeah, we're not the first racist people. Africans are racist. First of all, he doesn't obviously understand the definition of racism. Okay, doesn't understand the definition of racism. It's very simple. Okay, racism, okay, is when one race, yeah, views another race, yeah, as superior or inferior to oneself and enacts policies to basically exploit those advantages based on nothing else than race. And race is a phenotypic trait. Yeah. Ethnocentrism is completely different. Okay. Yes, ethnocentrism goes way back because people have always had group mentality, group and out group mentality. That's something that goes back through history. Okay. In fact, you could just, your family is a group. Okay. Anyone outside of your family is an out group, and you're going to have preference for your group over a bunch of strangers. You will fight for your group. Okay. So you could boil it down to that, but that's not the same as racism. Racism is to go into a society, or is to look at your own society, such as British society and European society at the time, which had both white and black occupants. And then through the drawing of racial laws and racial lines, all of a sudden, those dark-skinned people who are every bit as British as those light-skinned or white-skinned people, all of a sudden lose their rights, or are cast as another people, or find themselves being exported, or find themselves being enslaved. And that's what the British did, not only in their own land. We can obviously see in Americas was where this kind of thought of racial thinking really reached its apex. But then British went around its entire colony, creating castes, okay? Importing Indians into many of these places, in many of their colonies in Africa, to create a separate caste, a ruling caste over the domestic black population. Don't try and say that that has historical precedence, because phenotypic variance has always existed, but no one exploited phenotypic variance like the Europeans did. You are the fathers and the inventors of racism. That is a fact. Unless you can cite examples earlier than the British of this kind of out and out racism taking place, and you can't justify that by saying, well, these people enslaved Africans, blah, blah, blah. And by the way, for every Middle Eastern population who historically enslaved Africans, I guarantee you they enslaved 5 times more from the Black Sea that no one likes to talk about. So you can't argue that on a racial basis either. Okay, to be very, very, very clear. So him trying to act like, oh, racism's always existed. Well, no, that's just factually wrong, unless you change the definition of racism, just like you change the definition of slavery, and you change the definition of so many words to suit the point that you're trying to make. Let me give a quick shout out to Macy. Thank you very much for $2, sister. She says, there they go, equivocating again. Absolutely. Always making some kind of, creating some kind of false equivalence. That's the basis of their argument, you know?
Medieval Arabs had racist views of both Europeans and Africans. Gandhi was disparaging about Africans. So let's be clear, racism is...
That's not racism, that's ethnocentrism, okay? That's just people viewing their own group, or prioritizing their own group, or even viewing their own group as superior to others, but not that ideology is not executed through a racial structure like it was done by the Europeans. That's when it becomes racism. So false.
Not a peculiarly British thing, it's abhorrent. And my point is, racism was not, you cannot say that the British Empire was essentially racist, because there were also anti-racist impulses as well. And the whole of the abolition movement, which became widely popular in this country in the late 1700s.
You can't say it was essentially racist because there were anti-racist impulses. Did you know what he said there? Okay, so basically saying it was essentially racist, but every now and then they got a little pushback from within the empire. So therefore you can't say it's essentially racist. That's just a that's just a logical fallacy, you know.
Hundreds was premised on the basic equality of all people under God, regardless of race. And that
you're defending the empire by citing a lot of anti-imperialists, but as I say, we will come to slavery. Just on colonialism, racism, you mentioned again, you said lots of other societies were racist. Gandhi was racist. Africans are racist. First of all, we're talking about the British Empire. So that's one issue.
Yes, but let's put that in context.
But you're a moral theologian. So you're supposed to describe actions and judge actions objectively, independently. The whataboutism is something you find on the playground. Well, miss, I hit him, but he hit me, and that kid hit that kid.
Okay.
If you're evaluating whether the British Empire was good or evil, you should evaluate it on its merits.
I'm quite clear that racism from whatever quarter is morally wrong. What I'm against is picking.
No, so first of all, I disagree that he is clear on the fact that racism is morally wrong. I actually don't believe he thinks that racism is morally wrong. I think he's saying that because he thinks it's the right thing to say. But if you think something is morally wrong, what you don't do is then qualify that thought with a however, but. Okay, if racism is morally wrong, racism is morally wrong. Okay, you can put a period, you can put a full stop at the end of that and then proceed with your next statement. If you proceed that with a however, but, that means no, you don't think it was wrong. You're looking for ways to normalize it, which is what he spends the extent of his time doing and does. I'm going to say seemingly, I'm not going to purchase his garbage book, but seemingly throughout the contents of his book is to just say, well, if you call us racist, what about these guys? Weren't they racist too? And it's kind of like, that's not a justification for anything, especially if you're approaching a subject, like you say, from an ethical standpoint. There's nothing ethical about having that outlook.
The British and say these people were extraordinarily racist, because it isn't true.
I mean, you're using straw man arguments. Extraordinary race, I don't know what that metric is, but we had the biggest empire in the world. Exactly.
Just using hyperbole to make it something that you go, well, it's not extraordinarily racist. Okay. Some might say that's racist, but you can't call it extraordinarily racist, because until I killed 6 million you-know-whos and placed them in a concentration camp, it's not extraordinarily racist, it's just average racism. We only killed 10,000 here, 10,000. This is the kind of arguments that they make. And I'm glad that Mehdi's doing a good job of calling it out anyway.
We were involved in the slave trade. We conquered countries, like multiple countries across the world, ran them almost as dictatorships. And the colonial leaders did speak in racist terms. I've only quoted 2. We could quote about 20 more.
Not just colonial leaders, okay? To be very clear, not just colonial leaders. Leaders of the free world, leaders of post-abolitionist Britain, okay? Once again, I raised the point of Winston Churchill, who said, many racist things, one of them being after obviously the massacre of the Tasmanians. He said, to justify it, is it not right that a superior, I'm kind of like paraphrasing here, but he says something along the lines of, is it not right that a superior force has entered the, and conquered the blacks, basically, because they don't really have the agency. This is he is essentially arguing a kind of like scientific racism, survival of the fit argument, saying that, well, it's the Europeans' right to conquer the blacks and to unalive them en masse, because that's our right. Yeah, this from your great liberator Winston Churchill, who fought Hitler clearly for moral reasons. No, he fought him for his own interests. Yeah, that's the only reason he fought him.
There is a lot of whataboutism in the book, Nigel. You seem to justify.
What's wrong with whataboutism?
What is wrong with whataboutism?
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you an example. You say, for example, the first Opium War, in which the British killed thousands of Chinese people. You say that war was wrong. You say in the book, you say it was wrong, it was unjust. But then you add straight away, in just a couple of lines later, that those Chinese deaths at the hands of the British in the 19th century, and I quote you, fade into insignificance when compared to the millions killed by Mao in China a century later. What has one got to do with the other? Mao killing Chinese people in the 20th century doesn't make it okay for the British to kill Chinese people in the 19th.
And if that kind of argument that he's raised there, which is just ridiculous in itself, let me find the most atrocious event. If I can find a more atrocious event in the history of any of the colonized nations, then that completely, justifies what the British did or subsequently would do in those nations. That's the argument that he's making. And it really does just make me think of that entire, I haven't watched it, but I've seen critiques of it, that Matt Walsh documentary on slavery. Just like, this is stupid ship, you should call it. It's not scholarship, it's stupid ship. You know, when you when you make those kind of arguments, it's kind of like, really? Oh well, you know, yeah, we did this in China, but well, it's not compared to what Mao did. Oh, Mao, and they love Mao. They love quoting Mao. They quoted Mao since I was in school. I remember he came up #1. Who was the worst, most evil person in history? Mao. Mao, right at the top. I'm like, Mao, really? You white people, like there's no white man. Like I'm looking at your top 5 list, and the only white people in that list are like barely whites. Do you know what I mean? There's no Western Europeans in the top 10. I'm like, nah, you guys are tripping, man.
The connection.
How is that a moral assessment?
The connection is this: the communist government in China uses the period when European powers and British powers were exploiting China to excite Chinese nationalism, and the communist government in Beijing completely ignores the fact that Mao presided over the deaths of Chinese on a much larger scale.
That's not a moral point, though. So why did you add the caveat? It pales into insignificance compared to Mao.
To make clear, Mehdi, that this was not extraordinary.
So do you hear that there? It's not extraordinary. What the British have done is not extraordinary. Slave, not extraordinary. Genocide, not extraordinary. Because I've found a single event, which, by the way, has likely been massively inflated because the West like to do that, to normalize. They like to twist history. And when they twist history, they don't need... no one needs to provide any provenance for it. So even the numbers of people that died in the alleged Holocaust, yeah, we all know that those numbers aren't. Anyway, I'm not going to go into that right now. But let's just say it's gone up significantly since I was a child. Okay, it's gone up by at least 1 million since I was a child. So it continually inflates, and everything gets a lot worse. And before you know it, they're going to be telling, you know, our grandkids are going to be learning that they were, you know, they were cut up and fed in soup to and fed in soup to the SS. You know, they'll be changed because they're continually changing the goalposts of that, you know, alleged massacre that took place. This is what they do. So we can't trust anything that they say, particularly when it comes to numbers. I just don't trust them, you know. Shout out to Kalugu. Appreciate your donation, sir. I'm assuming you're sir. I could be wrong there, by the way, but thank you very much for your £5. Shout out to you. And thank you for supporting the discussion.
But that's not what morality is about. I mean, Nigel, it's not just China. I mean, throughout the book, I read this book, throughout the book, you kind of go halfway there, and then you can't help yourself. You say, the British Empire was bad, but it wasn't the Nazis. The first Opium War was bad, but Mao was worse. You say famines happened in India under the imperial watch, but the famines happened after independence too. You say the camps in Kenya were bad, but then you say, but the Soviet gulags were worse. You do that throughout the book. You can't bring yourself to just say, this was really bad. As a Briton, I'm saying this was bad.
Well,
why can't you do that? Can you do it tonight?
Page 276, you will find a whole list of the bad things over which the British Empire presides.
Yeah, this is the funny part, because page 276 is his "I will condemn Britain" page, apparently, which is hilarious. The fact that he's concatenated it, or you know what I mean, into this tiny little list and said, yeah, this is it, the list of bad things that British Empire did. It's like, list, surely this should be a 4-volume biblical epic, but no, he's got it on a single. Go to page 276. That immediately tells you how disingenuous an individual this guy is.
I'm chuckling because I had a feeling that you were going to say page 276, because you wrote a postscript, and every time someone criticizes you, say, look at page 276. It's like your one page out of 400 pages where you list all the crimes, and it's your go-to move.
Fast. Shout out, Mehdi. Cooked him there. That was good.
To say page 276.
Because page 276 summarizes what the previous 250 pages have said. It's not just the only place.
So can you do it tonight? Can you criticize something the British Empire did as evil without any qualification, caveat, if, but, what about?
Slavery, disproportionate violence, sometimes the theft of land. The most destructive thing probably was the spread of disease, which was inadvertent.
You just did it. You just did it. You just did it in front of our eyes.
Well, tell me, the COVID
So of the things he listed there, allegedly the most disruptive thing was the spread of disease, which was inadvertent. Okay, that's the most disruptive thing. Like when he's talking about slavery, the theft of land, do you think he's even given half a thought to, I don't know, the black people who were boiled alive in hot melting sugar by their slave owners? Do you think any of that's crossing his mind when he says, oh, well, the most harmful thing was the inadvertent spread of disease? And by the way, it wasn't always inadvertent. It was actually deliberate in many cases, as we are well aware of. And someone's even put there, sometimes theft of land. Yeah, sometimes with the colonialism is literally the theft of land. Okay, that's almost the definition. Okay, the theft of land. Okay, we are colonizing this land. Yeah, that means you're stealing the land. You're arriving from outside and you're turning a standing nation, a sovereign nation, into a colony of the British Empire. That literally definition is theft of land by force. That's your MO. That is what the British Empire was. The ability of this man to euphemize British imperial behavior, I would say it's scary, but it's not scary. As a Brit, I'm telling you right now, this man is so normal. Do you understand? He's so normal. And you'll notice the critique and the pushback he gets. He will get critique and pushback, but you'll see it will tend to be from minorities. It will tend to be from small groups. You'll find that big broadsheet publications will publish people like this. HarperCollins, yeah, published this man's book. He'll get spreads in the Daily Mail. He is a senior member of the UK Parliament with these ignorant views. Do you understand? This is you don't get more far right than this. People are out here thinking that far right is someone standing going, oh, the immigrants, the immigrants, we don't like the immigrants. This is far right. This is what far right looks like to me. Someone who says, hey, let's imperial, like because what comes after this is let's do imperialism again. It was such a great, it was such a great experiment last time. It was so beneficial to the people we did it to. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. These people clearly can't lead themselves. Look, those African nations have been independent for over 60 years now. What have they done? We should be sending our troops to. This is what far right looks like, people. Okay, this is what. Don't let anybody distract you. These are the most dangerous people in society.
The COVID epidemic killed 7 million people.
Okay.
It originated in China.
Okay.
Did the Chinese intend to kill 7 million people?
You've literally just made my point. Why are we talking about COVID? You couldn't bring yourself to just say it was really bad what the British Empire did.
The point has to do with...
And he's talking about the accident. Well, I'm not even going to talk about, the pandemic. Yeah. I'm not even going to talk about that too much right now. And the legitimacy of how it spread and whether or not it was, natural or Wuhan or this, that, and the other. I'm not even going to talk about all of that. But the point, once again, is he's using that as a comparison and a justifier for when we know actually that the British Empire did use the spread of diseases that they knew people wouldn't have inoculations for and wouldn't have immunity for as a form of chemical warfare when they would, seek to deplete the populations of places that they were settling and invading. That's known, that's known history. Okay, that's referenceable history. And the fact that he'd make this is like the most, he doesn't have any, like I said, there's no value for the people that were killed. There's no value for them,
The moral quality of an act depends on intention. There are lots of things we do that have bad effects. So
I agree with you on that. We agree.
So Europeans brought diseases to North America and Australia, as did Indonesian fishermen from Indonesia to northern Australia, which had devastating effects on native peoples. No one,
as did Indonesian people from to Northern Australia. Okay, so you see what he did there. Okay, so he talked about the fact he conflated the British, infecting the North American population with smallpox, which we know was a deliberate tactic to reduce the population and to make their war of aggression against the Native Americans a much easier one. He's conflating that with the North Indonesians, who were by and large invited to the Australias, as a result or as an implication of the colonization of Oceania and the movement of people from different regions of the colonies into different parts of the colonies for specific purpose, and that having a kind of like a disadvantageous effect where there were some diseases and some immunity issues when those people were brought into those populations. And he's conflated them like it's one event, like it's the same thing. It's the same thing. They didn't mean to do it, and neither did we. Like, this guy is vile. He really is vile. That's what you can see where the thumbnail comes from now, guys. He really is a vile human being.
One intended to do it. No one can be blamed for it.
I agree with your intent. But when you carry out a massacre, like in Amritsar, that's intent. When you carry out torture in Kenya and you say we're going to do this quietly, that's intent.
As I admit in the book.
Okay, good. So we can condemn what happened in Kenya as an evil stain on British history. As part of the empire.
Well, it depends what you mean, but
the torture of people in the Mau.
The clubbing to death of 11 detainees by African warders at Hola Camp, yes, was very bad. And
you see, he just did it again there. So he's comparing the clubbing to, and he had the exact number of 11 detainees. The clubbing to death of 11 detainees, by African this, that, and the other. I'm surprised he didn't say black Bantus, because that's what I figured that he might as well use a term like that, because that's what his kin Simon Webb would have said. The clubbing to death of 11 detainees by black Bantu populations. That's kind of where he was heading to. The clubbing to death of 11 detainees. That's the best you can do for black on black violence, or for that's the best you can do, or African barbarity, mate. No one's talking about 11 detainees which you've held on to, and the British probably held on to for 100 years, so they could say, hey, look, the Africans do it as well. No one's comparing that to hundreds of thousands of people who you unalived in Kenya. How are they even equivocal in your mind? How are they even equivalent in your mind? This and then let's carry on.
The authorities are responsible for that. Yep.
Great. I love it when we agree. In the conclusion of your book, Colonialism: A Moral Reckoning, you offer your readers a tally of the evils of British colonialism, as well as of course, credit column in the British Imperial Ledger. Basically,
why do you say of course?
I'll tell you why.
You seem to be skeptical.
I am, and I'll tell you why. You summarize the pros and cons, the good and the evil, and then you say you're not keeping score. You say very explicitly, is that still the case, that you're not scoring them?
I don't say that.
You say, where's it gone? Let me just pull up the exact quote. You say, whatever the debit column of British colonialism, there's a credit column too, of which any fair ethical assessment must take into account the goods and evils that the empire caused intentionally or not, of such different kinds that they cannot be measured against one another.
The different keeping score. So I keep score, but I say you can't weigh these up.
You can't say one's longer or better than the other.
Tell me how.
Is that your...
So he's got his little balance book here. He's got his balance sheet of here are the good things we've done, and here are the negative things we've done, and you can't balance them against each other. We did some good and we did some evil. But look at the contradictions. Hilarious. Watch from here.
Position.
Tell me how.
No, I'm asking the question.
Can't be done.
It can't be done. So then why did you go on a right-wing podcast and say that the credit column is longer?
Because on the page it is. Because on the page it is.
Did you hear his argument there? The credit column is longer. His argument was because on the page it is. So this guy is seriously making an argument of word count. Yeah, he's making an argument of word count. He's saying, well, you look, when I typed it up, the credits to the British Empire were more than the bad things they did. Like, so you're saying basically if I wrote in full sentences rather than bullet points in one column as opposed to the other, then that changes the balance of good. And like, what kind of an asinine and stupid argument is that? It appears longer on the page. He knows exactly what he was doing and what he was saying when he went on that podcast. He knows exactly what he was saying. He was saying the British have done more good than bad. But now he's here saying, "Oh no, I was just making a visual point of that. When you look at the page, this column with our credits dropped slightly lower than the one there. So it was just a visual." What an idiot! What an absolute disingenuous moron this guy is.
Let me be clear. On the page, there's a longer list of the good stuff. On the matter of whether you can weigh these things up, you can't do it.
So why mention it? So why mention that one's longer than the other? Isn't that literally the most like? Why would you mention it? You know exactly why you're mentioning it. This is that is. Sorry, let's carry on.
You were just talking about the physical pages that take it up. You weren't trying to imply on a right-wing podcast in 2023 that the credit column is longer for the British Empire.
Why is it relevant? The podcast was right-wing. What's it got to do with anything?
Oh, I think because you were talking to a host who was much more in agreement with you, and you were much more honest about what your actual view is, which is you think the British Empire did more good than evil.
No, I didn't say that. You have. I've made it perfectly clear. I don't think you can weigh up goods and evils in that fashion.
Okay.
So the point you were making is actually beside the point.
Even if we accept,
literally quoted him, and he literally just said that he was making a point that one was longer than the other on the page. So the only way he could have come to that conclusion is if the host of the podcast said to him, on the page of British of British moral credits versus moral debits on your balance sheet of good and evil of the British Empire, which column appears longer? He's saying that's the argument, and he was like, well, you know, the word count on the left column, the good things we did is 1034, whereas the word count on the right column happens to be 968, which in turn means that, well, you can read the conclusions yourself. This guy's an idiot, I swear.
that the column is longer, and you're saying you don't think it's longer. You were talking about number of pages.
It was longer physically on the
physically,
page.
you're talking physically. Okay, but let me get to my question. How did
I wish Mehdi didn't let him off there. He was literally been primed for a cooking there. He got off way too light.
does that morally justify any of the evil side of the column?
It doesn't.
It doesn't, right?
Well, but name me, okay, it doesn't, no, it doesn't justify it. But name me any state, as I say, any long-standing state, that doesn't preside over bad stuff.
Isn't that a problem then, as a moral philosophy?
Yeah, well,
like, how do we judge the evil people in history? They'll all come up with some defense of some good thing they did.
No.
Or do we just give the British Empire that pass?
No, we don't. We don't give, no.
Did you see the uncomfortability? And this is the thing, you have to understand something here, guys. Yeah, I am not being hyperbolistic, if that's a word. Yeah, I'm not exaggerating when I say that this man's views are very, very analogous to the British middle class. Your average Daily Mail / Daily Telegraph reader has these views. Do you understand? They have these exact views. They might not go out right and say it, but they have been conditioned by the media to think that these views are very sensible. So they feel a great sense of uncomfortability when a guy like Mehdi, a visibly Asian guy, is not only completely dismantling these ridiculous arguments, but the fact that it's being done by an Asian as well. And you can see the physical uncomfortability every time the camera pans to someone who's of British descent in the crowd. It's quite funny.
Moral philosophy.
Yeah, well,
like, how do we judge the evil people in history? They'll all come up with some defense of some good thing they did.
No.
Can you see the uncomfortability there, guys? It's hilarious.
Or do we just give the British Empire that pass?
No, we don't. We don't give, no, and I don't give it that pass. What I say is, the empire contained both these things, different times.
I mean, the millions of people died because of the British Empire, under the rule of the British Empire, over the course of hundreds of years. Yeah, so I can say that is a great evil, just as I can look at the Nazis and say millions of people died in Nazis. Now, we can play pedantry around who was essentially racist or not, but in terms of killing people, the British Empire killed a lot of innocent people, and many of us would argue that should be a bigger source of shame and focus than the fact that, yes, they built railway stations. It only matters whether the British Empire did good or evil in its own terms. You have to pick, are you a historian or are you an ethicist? Because you keep jumping around.
I'm a bit of both.
You're neither, respectfully. You definitely are not an ethicist, because an ethicist doesn't seek to continually justify evil and abhorrent acts. And you're certainly not a historian, because the amount of picking and choosing you're doing in terms of things that you want to cover and not providing context when it comes to gish galloping your discussion, your talking points about the good things that the British Empire have done, and you know, inevitably falling on the same arguments over and over again that British imperialist supporters always fall back on, which is, oh, we built some railways, oh, we built some aqueducts, oh, we built some irrigations, like all of this stuff that your colonies needed to operate efficiently, but you didn't leave with any essential, really any nation with any essential infrastructure of benefit. Okay, that's why much of the infrastructure you left, regardless of where you left it, would fall into disrepair, because it was entirely useless to the day-to-day running and the management of a nation. And if that's your only plus point, if that's your only positive, if that's your only kind of like moral credit to those societies, and the moral debit is genocide of millions of people, enslavement, disenfranchisement, exiling from land, all of these things, the total destruction of their native governance systems. But because you can summarize those into bullet points, yeah, because the word genocide is only, how many letters is that? 8 letters. Because the word genocide is only 8 letters, and railway systems across Africa is a longer sentence, you're going to say that that is a greater good. That's how stupid the argument he made a minute ago was. Oh, on the page it's longer. On the page it's longer, so therefore longer sentences, longer paragraphs equals greater good in that part of nation. This guy's a moron.
So my view is that British Empire presided over both good and evil, and I do the best I can at the end, and I explain what my overall argument is.
Let's go to our panel.
And the point is that he doesn't have to justify himself. This is what privilege looks like. This man has never been called into question. He's never been called to justify himself. And when he managed to get his book published without having any kind of peer critique or anything like that, because of privilege. Okay, he's grown up in privilege. He's always got what he wanted. He occupies the most senior position in Christianity and ethics in Oxford University, in spite of being clearly a midwit when it comes to those particular subjects. He's not particularly intellectual, but he is a man of means. He has access, and he gets what he wants when he wants it. That's the bottom line. This is a perfect picture of what white privilege looks like. Not being particularly brilliant at anything that you're offering, not offering anything valuable to the field of study or research that you're participating in, but because you're born into privilege, and because you've got a lordship, and because you own land by ill-gotten means, you get to be the intellectual authority. You know, one of the things that you have to know, this is a long line of behavior that you can trace through British history. So if you look at all of the great inventions that British inventors have contributed, one of the things that you'll notice is that it's always, this was invented by Lord this, or Sir this, or Lord that, or Sir that. You'll notice that, don't you? It's not because these people were brilliant. Okay, it's not because these people are great minds. It's because these were the people of means. They likely didn't invent any of those things. Even going back to Mr. Sir Isaac Newton, it's probably someone else that they were probably managing a team of researchers, and they learned to sign their name to it. That's how the entire patent system came about, by the way. It was a way to colonize ideas. So the entire patent system in the US was a way that a few rich people were able to colonize the ideas and the inventions of an entire population of people. Okay, and this is why you have these kind of like polymaths, particularly throughout Europe and in the UK, yeah, who invent these long lines of inventions, and they don't seem they don't seem that related. You're like, well, how did they invent this and this and this? And you know, Da Vinci's one of them, respectfully. I know he's a great artist, but he invented all these. Do you think that he literally invented all of those things? No, they would preside as, you know, over research institutions, over schools or whatever, and they would literally be signing their name off as the person who invented such and such. It's called theft. That's how they participate. And this guy is just a product of that entire system, where he doesn't deserve to be where he's at. He didn't deserve that position. He didn't even seem like he probably has the intellect to have even attended Oxford or Cambridge as a student, but he would have been born with that right. He knew where he was going from childhood. Okay, and that's what privilege affords you. In, you know, white privilege, and not even just white privilege. This is like white upper class privilege. He is a definite product of that.
Of experts who've been waiting patiently here. Gurminder Bambara is a professor of historical sociology at the Department of International Relations, the University of Sussex, editor of the forthcoming book, The Modern World After Colonialism. Gurminder, you've read Nigel's book, I know. In his introduction, he does say he sets out to paint a historically accurate and fairer picture of the British Empire. Did he do it in your view?
Not in my view, no.
What's your central objection to what you've heard from Nigel tonight?
Well, I think one of the first things we have to take issue with is the way in which Nigel constructs the very idea of empire, and this argument that he makes that empires have existed across human societies, across all time, and that all empires are effectively the same sort of phenomenon. And I would argue that we need to think about empires quite differently. There is a significant difference between empires of incorporation, which included empires such as the Ottoman, the Chinese, the Mughal, and European empires of extraction, which were effectively the British, the French, and the Dutch. And one of the ways in which we can think about the differences between the two is the way in which they relate to questions of food scarcity that occur, because food scarcity occurs across all human societies at different times. The British Empire, and if we compare it with the Mughal Empire, because it's the same territory, the same populations, there was no significant famine that created death under the Mughal Empire, which ruled for over 400 years. Under the British Empire within India, when the East India Company came into power, they presided over a famine in Bengal, which killed over 10 million people out of a population of 30 million, and they collected more taxes at the same time. There had never been a famine under Mughal rule within Bengal, and the next time there was a significant famine in Bengal was when the British government were directly in control during the Second World War, where 3 million died.
Okay. Let me bring in Lawrence Goldman, who is a fellow in...
So once again, that's a very good argument from an Indian perspective. And yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a part of history that I'm interested to know more about, because I don't really look into Indian history or the Indian part of imperialism. And it's very, very interesting to hear that perspective. But yes, we knew about the famines that were created by the British, and once again, the justification for that. Because when you think about these are the kind of secondary effects of colonialism and imperialism as well, is a lot of people look at the African continent, for instance, and they look at it with the viewpoint that, oh, well, and a lot of British historians like this guy will make the argument, oh, well, you know, there was no famine. I wouldn't say there was no famines, but this idea of there being like widespread poverty. In fact, no, people were self-sufficient. Okay, they had small subsistence farms, like I said, once again, and were able to feed themselves. What creates widespread famine, like what she's talking about, is when you have the centralization of agriculture, the centralization of pastoralism. It's when you industrialize to extract, exactly what she was saying. So I talk about one of the things to talk about is that during the entire Live Aid period, so that period of time, basically from the late 1970s up until really the 90s, when Ethiopia became very associated with poverty because there was that massive famine that spread across Ethiopia. The Ethiopian nation was actually a net producer of produce during this time. In other words, it was producing more, it was exporting more produce than it was importing, and yet the actual constituents of Ethiopia were starving. Why is that happening? And that's happening because you have centralized agriculture. Okay, you have centralized pastoral, and basically you have centralized resource in terms of the production of food. And you want organizations and companies to profit from what's being grown, not the people. So the nation had the climate, was producing more than enough to feed its own people, far more than you needed to feed the entire population of Ethiopia. And yet the people weren't getting the food. This is a byproduct of capitalism. And by the way, this is one of the strongest defeating arguments when it comes to the argument of the abolition of slavery, because this was one of the immediate effects of the abolition of slavery, was by taking these populations of people and forcing them into wage labor, it created this modern phenomena of these massive, widespread famines that take place. This is why what happened in India happened. Okay, the privatization of farmland, the privatization of arable land, the theft of the people's ability to feed themselves, forcing people into cities, into different places to basically sell their labor for cheap. That became the replacement for slavery. So when they abolished slavery, it wasn't to hurt their bottom line, it actually benefited their bottom line, because it was cheaper to force people to work for damn near nothing, picking fruit, picking cotton, working, in the sugar plantation XYZ, to pay them damn near nothing. But hey, you're free, I'm not your responsibility, than to have them enslaved and have these people consistently plotting for your overthrow and trying to kill you, which is what happened in the slavery system. So they weighed it up and they said, let's get people into really poor, really badly paid labor, where they don't have any other option to feed themselves other than to work for our corporations. That works a lot better than keeping them as unpaid slaves, which is actually much more expensive. And Adam Smith talks about this extensively, talks about this changing of people from unpaid to paid labor and the need to do that. He talks about it extensively. This was very well thought through before the abolition took place. So this is the thing. That's one of the reasons why you saw these massive, widespread, famines that took place across the global East as a result of imperialism.
Tutor in modern history at St. Peter's College, Oxford, former editor of the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography. Lawrence, how do you respond to what you've heard tonight?
Well, I'm fascinated by the moralism that you show, Mehdi, and that I think the audience shows.
Here we go. So this is our University of Oxford lecturer again. And I thought they would at least get someone who was a bit more leftist, a little bit more balanced to come in here. But really, it ends up looking like a hack job by Mehdi, because the two white guys are making such... and these are both University of Oxford lecturers as well. So these people are educating the creme, well, what is seen globally, clearly isn't, the creme de la creme of historical research in the UK. Yeah, they're from the top institutions. And listen to the morally decrepit argument that this guy makes.
Because I don't think moralism has a place in these arguments, if I may say so. If you read history as a record of whether people are just or evil, you're not doing anything at all. You're certainly not reading history. You're imposing upon the complexity of human civilization.
Mehdi is clearly just critiquing this man whose book is based on the morality of the British Empire. And he's asking him challenging questions. He's not introducing morality. Now, the fact that this guy is not able to read that and he's passing that accusation on to Mehdi means that he feels a need to defend this charlatan, this Nigel Biggar on the stage. So he knows exactly what he's doing here. He's someone who defends these points of view, and he's someone who obviously is a British Empire imperialist supporter.
Not only the wrong categories, because every society, every civilization is evil in some ways and good in others. And you're also, if I may say so,
projection once again. Every society is good in some ways and evil in others is typical British projection. Typical projection.
So you are projecting onto the past your own contemporary morality. If you think about racism for a moment.
So here we go. This sounds like it's going to lead into a justification for scientific racism. Oh, well, you know, you're projecting onto the past our moral. That's what that's what we're supposed to do. Okay, that's something that we do implicitly as human beings. Yeah, we always constantly make moral arguments. B, what we don't do is say, well, we can't do that at all, because then what you have is people who disingenuous people like you who say, hey, look, if we look historically, the majority of British intellectuals during this time were heinously racist. So therefore, we just have to accept that that was the normal way to think back then. That's not a justification. It never will be a justification, because all you have to do is go back a little further in history to realize people didn't think like that before these scientific racists and eugenicists came along and poisoned the well with their, you know, and to think that people aren't able to think outside that or to think above that just shows your own heart. I think it exposes you for someone who sympathizes with that perspective. You are an apologist for some of the most deplorable human beings in history. That's exactly what he's doing here.
Most of human history has been dominated by people who have thought in racial terms, who have divided the...
See, see, people who, most of human history, that's not, first of all, that's not even true. He said most of human history. No, most of your history, and that's the whole argument that we're making about the immorality of the British Empire. For almost the entirety of the British Empire, the people who enacted the most heinous acts on history, on history, on cultures, on research, and in economics, land reforms, all of those things, they did it with a racial justification. They justified it using made-up rules and laws of scientific racism, which equated the people that they were dominating as subhumans, which allowed them to conduct themselves in the most morally abhorrent ways. And you're going to sit here and act like, well, most of human history, people have done that. It's like, no, they haven't actually. Yeah, no, they haven't. Yeah, this was something that actually is quite uniquely European. Okay, uniquely European. that freeze frame is what it does say, or does it look the side eye is everything. I told you guys the uncomfortability is hilarious.
World and the peoples that they governed according to their races. It is absolutely ubiquitous. It is absolutely normal. And we, of course,
absolutely ubiquitous and absolutely normal. So he's now speaking in extremes as well. He's not even saying we can see elements of this. He's saying, no, actually, everybody was as racist and as what are you talking about? This is a guy who's claiming to be a historian. I would like to see his evidence for racism, because once again, if you have that overlap between racism and ethnocentrism, which are entirely separable things, these are things that we can clearly see that racism has laws governed around phenotype and skin color. Okay, you have to be able to back apply that historically. If you're not able to support that, which you will be unable to support, you have to then abandon that argument. These people are absolutely, they're so disingenuous with the arguments they raise.
Because we now live in anti-racist societies, we are simply projecting onto the past. They would not understand us, Mehdi. It would be...
And this point here is the one that really irritates me, because this is like this is your headache argument that these alt-right people make. Oh, we live in an anti-racist society. So what they're essentially trying to do is they're trying to create a dichotomy between the racist historical past and the current anti-racist present, which is just the most stupid argument you ever heard. Okay, were people racist in the past? Yes. Are people racist now? Still yes. What is the anti-racism he's talking about? Anti-racism is simply people pushing back against racist narratives. So we now have institutions, which, by the way, are being deconstructed in real time, but let's just say they're not, even just for the sake of this argument, playing devil's advocate. We have institutions now that are set up to dismantle and to correct the racist institutions of the past. In fact, we've seen multiple dispensations of racial pseudoscience be dismantled as they crumbled in on themselves as modern science disproved them. Does that mean that we're in a place that is the opposite of the past now? No, it doesn't. They're not dichotomous. We just simply we live in a time where anti-racism or measures of anti-racism exist. You can't say we live in an anti-racist time. No, we don't, because you exist and Nigel Biggar's up on stage and you're both clearly racist. Okay, you're both clearly racist. So we don't live in an anti-racist time. That's the thing. This is why all of these far right people end up feeling so offended, yeah, at everything. They take offense to everything. Because to them, oh, we live in a woke time. Oh, we live in an anti-racist. Every single correction, every single argument that's made, every single debate that people raise to say, hey, can we stop doing this? This is something that we should have left in the past. They take offense to it because they're like, oh, you're affecting my free speech. Oh, you're doing this, and that's the type of people who say we live in an anti-racist time. No one with a working, functioning cerebral cortex is going to turn around and be like, oh, we live in an anti-racist period. There's nothing anti-racist about the time we live in. We just live in a time where it's not so racist that you can get away with the things that you used to get away with, but it's still highly racist. And this is the thing, they're so this guy's just an idiot. And he sounds like someone made their comment earlier about David Starkey. He's another British historian, racist piece of crap in a very senior position, because that's what happens in the UK. He sounds a lot like David Starkey to me. Sounds a lot like him. This is the kind of idiotic thing that guy would say.
Completely ahistorical. So I asked the audience...
You're ahistorical. You're ahistorical.
To think historically and not moralistically.
So the problem, Lawrence, is that Nigel specifically wrote a book saying he wanted to make a moral assessment of empire. So if you have a problem with the morality side of things, you should take it up with Nigel, not me. That was the goal of the book. In terms of what you...
He's well aware of that, and he's smiling sheepishly, but he was well aware of that when he made the argument from the start. The issue is that he's just offended at the pushback. He expects, as a white male, and both of them white males of senior position and senior rank when it comes to educational institutions, to be able to make any kind of argument, regardless of how you're talking about being ahistorical, you know, regardless of how historically inept the argument that both of them are making is, he expects to make it and be able to make it without much pushback, because, hey, we've thought about this for longer than you have. And it's, you know, it's absolutely, he literally just said, we live in a anti-racist society. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? We don't live in an anti-racist society. We live in a society where people look at racism, I would say, certainly more objectively than they did historically, when morons like you got to write all of the books based on whatever racist pseudoscientific claptrap was floating about at that moment in time. We don't live in that time, or I say we live lesser so in that time than we do now. But to say we live in an anti-racist society as though racism is seen as the bane of moral thought is load of nonsense. Otherwise, Nigel Biggar wouldn't be on stage right now.
Said about, in terms of what you said about projecting onto the past, I hear that argument a lot, and I take your point about racism and where cultural attitudes go. But killing lots of people, I'm pretty sure they thought that was wrong in 1850, 1750, 1650. Murdering and massacring women and children, I think they thought that was wrong at the time as well.
But isn't it remarkable in the history of the British Empire that at a certain point in the 19th century, they began to think rather differently about the use of violence. And they wanted, for example...
Because they said...
Disingenuous and lying once again. They started thinking differently about the use of violence. Once again, I will drive home the point that 1 year after the official abolition of slavery, 1 year after the passing of the Slavery Abolition Act in 1833 and 1834, the British conducted one of the biggest genocides in recorded history in the Australias. So they didn't start thinking differently about, in fact, they did start thinking differently about violence. They thought to themselves, we need to ramp this shit up. Okay, if we're not going to be keeping slaves, let's get some land and let's kill all of the people that reside in that land. So respectfully, when you got people like him who should know better, but I'm sure would prefer to. He relies on the fact that most of the people in the audience aren't going to be aware of these things that have taken place historically. He's got to be aware of the fact that most of them aren't going to be that historically literate. So he can make these ridiculous claims about the British having some kind of value for life. In the 19th century, they still had a good 100 years of genocides and massacres that were take place. Bear in mind, this is 50 years before the colonization of Africa, 50 years before the Berlin Conference. So this is before they really even started to cook on the African continent. And he's talking about, oh, we've had a real enlightenment period where we started looking at violence differently. What the frig is he talking about? When did that take place? The only violence that you stopped doing was the violence, well, I should say stop, but reduced was the violence in the Caribbean because you kept getting your asses whooped. Yeah, because even back then, our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean got together and started kicking your ass. So you thought we need to change tactic, respectfully.
Up concentration camps in South Africa straight after that.
Perhaps, but what they wanted to do was trade. Now, the British Empire, as you presented, is one long exercise in the same thing. But as a historian, I put
every single thing you traded every single thing you traded required the widespread unaliving of local populations and or enslavement. So he said, oh, we looked towards trade. Is he just literally trying to erase like nearly 200 years of history and jump straight ahead to the formation of the Commonwealth? Because that's what he's doing. He's essentially conflating the formation of the Commonwealth with the abolition of slavery. And he's ignoring, hundreds or so year period in between where the British were just conducting massacre after massacre. Like this is, and look at his title. He's the fellow in modern history at Oxford University. How? Goldman. Okay. All right. Let's go. Enough said. I didn't see the surname Goldman. Okay. Enough said. Let's carry on.
Put it to you that it's not. A free trade empire in the 19th century is really about commercial intertrade.
So let me bring in Kojo Karam, who's a professor of law and history at the University of Loughborough, author of Uncommon Wealth, Britain and the Aftermath of Empire. Nigel says many of the intentions behind the people setting up the empire were admirable in some ways. People wanted to establish self-government, he says. You just had Lawrence say a free trade empire. What is wrong with that view of the empire, in your opinion?
Well, I think what we need to do is actually look at what was said by some of the people who set up the empire. And what's really fortunate about the British Empire is so much of the heavy lifting of empire wasn't done by the British state, but was actually done by a number of private chartered companies. And what you can see...
Important point he's raising there. Majority of the British Empire was essentially governed by independent companies. And this is one of the ways that they kept themselves safe from, prosecution, from, retribution, from military enactment. They could isolate the act to individual corporations. And this is also a way that they were able to privatize the gains from these colonies, even though British people are so convinced that the British Empire was this great thing that they want to see come back. And it's like British people aren't even aware that it didn't even benefit half of them. It didn't even benefit half of them, apart from the grand architecture, which was built, a lot of the grand architecture that was built in the 19th century, in the mid-19th century. Operation Legacy, hint, hint. But yeah, a lot of the grand architecture that was built in the mid-19th century during the kind of like the Greek revival period that made Britain look like modern Britain, and Trafalgar Square and all these places with these grand architectural buildings that weren't there before and suddenly popped up. These aren't owned, by the British people. These are owned by individuals, lords, and these were individuals creating these buildings, okay, for their own, as an outlay of their wealth. Central London, all the city of London, all these places that look so wonderful with these fantastic old looking buildings, these archaic looking buildings, which were all built, by the way, in the mid-19th century during the height of British colonialism. All of these buildings that shot up didn't go into the hands of the general people, okay? So all of these people that are romantic, these kind of like working to middle class people that are romantic about the British Empire and act like it brought them so much benefit. And they don't even realize the same few individuals who have been gaining from the global installation of misery around different people, and that includes them. They don't even realize that their ancestors used to live on land where, you know, they used to pick their own fruit and hunt and were self-subsistence, and they didn't have to rely on the state and rely on 9-to-5 wages. The same people are the ones that colonized England and stole all the land there. But they're not aware of that. They're not aware of that. They want to support this, you know, the Tommy Robinsons and the dum-dums. Oh, get the immigrants out. I'm going to get the immigrants out so I can queue up in the food bank and I don't have 3 immigrants in front of me when I'm looking for food to feed my family. Morons.
In their charters is their objective for why they started the extraction of wealth in those countries, and that is to maximize profits for their shareholders. Whether they introduced some cultural practices or played a little football with the natives as part of that project is not the objective of these institutions. We can look at the historical conversation that happened, not subsequently rewriting history, but at the time. Look at the words of to say, if I said to you at the moment, the idea that the colonization of the Caribbean was the great source of wealth and power in Britain, you might think that that's been written by a C.L.R. James or an Eric Williams.
That's a fact, by the way. That's a fact. Okay, it was the Caribbean that was funding the British Empire for a long time through the sugar production. Okay, it was funding the British Empire, and a lot of people are totally unaware of that.
Or a Walter Rodney. No, that's Edmund Burke, the father of English conservatism. Until very recently, it was common sense that the British Empire gained most of its wealth from the colonization of the colonies, and it's in fact a lot of the revisionism that thing is being done right now.
Nigel, do you want to respond to Kojo or Govinda? He says revision.
Let me just start with Kojo, since it's fresh in my mind. So Kojo, on that last point, you're quite right. I mean, there are some economic historians who reckon that the contribution of slave trading and slavery to Britain's industrialization was, I think Eric Williams said, enormous. Others say central. Most economic historians that I know about say no, it was somewhere between small and modest. The greatest living historian of transatlantic slavery, David Eltis, and I say that because Henry Gates, the African-American historian at Harvard, rates Eltis as the most authoritative.
Well, I don't rate Gates, respectfully. Some of you will know that in the chat, and I'm sure people will push back, but I'm not a fan of Henry Louis Gates at all. But anyway. He
uses the word trivial in terms of the contribution of slave trading and slavery. So one thing we need to be very clear on that issue, anyone who makes an unqualified claim that slave trading and slavery made an enormous or central contribution.
I don't think I heard the last guy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I didn't hear the last guy say that slavery was the thing. He said that the British colonies, and I think he pointed out it was the Caribbean, the actual slaves, what they were doing in the Caribbean, which was the production of sugar, which was funding the British Empire for a large part. That's the point that I think he made there. I didn't actually think I heard him say it was the trading of slaves. So this feels like a long drawn out straw man he's creating here, but maybe I heard him incorrectly, but I'm sure I did not hear that.
British industrial prosperity is not telling the whole truth, because that is highly controversial.
Okay, as I mentioned earlier, we are going to talk slavery after the break. Do you want to deal with Gominda's point about you treat all empires the same, and the British Empire in many ways was worse than other empires?
Well, I know that empire took different forms. I don't accept the simple description of British Empire as extractive. Partly because
extractive is what it is. That's the bottom line. It was extractive. You can say I don't accept it as being extractive, but extractive is what it is. Okay, you can't. That literally was the function of British Empire, was to extract. So anyway, let me hear what his justification is here.
Because the population of India during British rule increased by almost 3 times, which implies some level of increasing prosperity.
Both can be the same. The population can increase, particularly, and will increase substantially if you're there for a period of hundreds of years, unless you have the most draconian measures of, family or control. But also, the question that most people will ask is, you know, if it's increasing and there's massive widespread famines, etc., taking place and the population is still going up, one would question the efforts or the accuracy of the census information that was taken initially, as opposed to what was taken during the end. So one could raise that argument to that, or one could raise that refutation to that argument. But also, on top of that, irrespective of the population going up, both things can be true. The population can go up. That doesn't refute in the slightest the fact that it was an extractive enterprise. That doesn't change. It still was extractive. You haven't disproven that. The way you disprove extraction is you say that they didn't, you know, take out a majority of the resource. The majority of the resource was left in the nation to prosper, and perhaps they had a settling empire in which they taxed the people highly and had a prospering nation which they sat inside and taxed highly and made their money from taxation, which is what a lot of previous, like the Mughal empires, would do, as opposed to an extractive empire, which was to bleed the nation dry, get what it can, and ship the goods, export the goods, export the, you know, the produce of the nation to wherever they needed to make the profit from it. So that you haven't refuted any of that, you know.
Area of cultivatable land in India increased 8 times under the British. So I don't deny there were.
But where did the produce go? Because if you're increasing the arable land 8 times, like he's just made the argument there, and I'm sure Rhodesians, people who like Cecil Rhodes, would make a similar argument. Oh, well, you know, the arable land increased larger. Okay, great. But where did the produce go? The produce of the land, if it didn't stay within the nation, then why are you taking any kind of glory for that? You're still extracting. In fact, all you've done is increased your means of extraction. This is not difficult. It's not difficult whatsoever.
Were instances of exploitation and extraction, but to characterize the whole of the empire in those terms is simply wrong, because the empire gave indigenous peoples opportunities they'd never had.
It gave indigenous peoples opportunities they never had, like what? Low paying wage jobs, yeah, working as basically indigenous slaves on their own land for corporations that were extracting the wealth elsewhere. That's the amazing opportunities that was afforded to the local populations.
Clarify, I mean, you mentioned the population. There is also studies done, Journal World Development.
Sorry, let me give a quick shout out to Dregger. I always miss your comments, brother. Appreciate you. Thank you for sending the $2. He said that last I checked, Zoroastrians are anti-evil. That goes above my head a little bit there. I don't know enough about Zoroastrians to I'm ashamed to say I don't know enough about Zoroastrians to have picked up on your joke there. Fill me in.
Did a study that between 1890 and 1920, there were 50 million excess deaths in India. We will continue this discussion. There's more to go. We've mentioned slavery a few times tonight. We will go back to our panel. We will hear more from Nigel in part 2 of Head to Head when we come back with Nigel Biggar to talk about his other book, Reparations, Slavery, and the Tyranny of Imaginary Guilt. Don't go away.
Reparations, slavery, and the tyranny of imaginary guilt. So part 2, this guy continues his complete, you know, it wasn't enough for him to praise the British Empire. He's now going to go for the jugular. Because by the way, guys, if you hadn't noticed, whenever it comes to these historians, ground zero, player one is always the black man. Okay. And I appreciate Mehdi and I appreciate the pushback coming from the Asian participants, but ground zero is always the black man. That's the bottom line. When it comes to these racists, these David Sarkeys or Snarkies, whatever the hell that idiot's name is, these Richard Lynns, these Nigel Biggars, their big problem is always with black people. You have to understand that. They're not really here to argue India. Yeah, they're not really here to argue the Middle East. They're not really here to argue about China. They're here to undermine the black man, undermine Africa. We are always player one in their mind. Yeah, that we're the ones who they want to refute. We're the ones who they want to come against. So that's where inevitably a majority of their literature is going to circle around. They'll always come back. They'll always circle back around to black people as though we're this incredibly powerful entity that is seeking to deconstruct them. Like they're clearly terrified. Now the reason for that is I don't know. That's you can lead your own conclusions. I've got a good idea from the research that I'm doing, and it's not only smallly in part linked to Operation Legacy. Okay, this book doesn't have that much, by the way. When I come out with my research on Operation Legacy, we'll hopefully be able to school you all up on that subject. But on that note, guys, it is 2 hours 45 minutes in, and we're definitely not going to look at the rest of this video because I am tired. It's a Sunday afternoon and I want to go and chill out. Please do make sure, guys, that you catch part 3, which is premiering in exactly 2 hours. Okay, on the King's Monologue channel. If you haven't seen, let me just actually quickly throw it on the screen. I've just started a new, well, I'm just been releasing a new documentary series. And that's cool to see myself live. I wasn't go away. Oh, trying to search here. The heck, man. Go back home. Let me just quickly pop this on the screen before I go. You guys can see how slow this machine moves. It's awful. It's got to do it again, isn't it? The King's Monologue. Okay. So here it is. So here's this series. This one premieres today, 7 p.m. Oh, I thought it was 8 p.m. Okay, so premieres in an hour. In 1 hour, this premieres. This is part 3 of my German conspiracy. Part 2 and part 1 are both available on the King's Monologue channel. Please watch that series. It should be very informative to you. Okay, it's a really important piece of research that I'm really glad to be able to present to you guys. So please do take time to watch it. Thank you everybody who's joined me. Shout out to all of you: Joy, RJ Mackenzie, Macy, Godlike, Kalugu, Texas John Brown, Fabrice, Kemu. Trying to make sure I don't miss anyone. Chrissy, One Love Soul, King Henry, I think, Dregger. And shout out to Dregger, Kalugu, Macy, and All One Page. Thank you very much for your donations, guys. I appreciate that. And yeah, let's call it a day. And shout out to you. Sorry if you've made and shine thy light. Okay, that's as far back as I can go in terms of the comments. Thank you very much if you've been participating, and obviously a special thank you to those who made donations. And I'll see you in an hour on the King's Monologue. Catch you later, guys. Peace. Hit the likes up before you go as well, please. Thank you. Shout out Wildflower, who's just joined as well.